Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us at the conference, first conference from the Order of the Oak, which we've entitled Walking the Walk, Sacred Actions for the Earth. You're all very, very welcome here. I'm Stuart Jeffrey. I often convene the meetings. I'm an OBOD person and in the Druid network, and I'm based in the UK. And co-hosting with me is Mari.
Hi, and I'm Mari Fix-McEwen, Shenavid, Seneta Bofush Koya Dentus from the U-Tree Clan Ewing, and I reside in the unceded territories of the Tongva and Chumash tribal peoples in California, and I'm a council member in the Order of the Oak and a member of OBOD. I'm also a member of the Indigenous Grandmothers of Europe and a founder of Ancestors of the Four Directions.
Excellent. So for those of you who don't know, the Order of the Oak, we're kind of a freewheeling voluntary group of we're international. We're Druids, obviously. We kind of focus on advocating, advising, real world action stuff to conserve, to restore and protect the divine planet. And we have this in the face of this unprecedented climate change, biodiversity loss and polycrisis that's caused by us human people, and we do this through learning, teaching, strengthening communities, and speaking out as well. So there's kind of three layers that we focus on, and this is, I suppose, part of the learning one. Murray.
Yes. Thank you for joining us at this conference where we're going to discuss the pertinent ideas and questions. And these questions are generally, how do we navigate our current climate crisis and challenge by taking effective action and uniting that action with spirituality? What is it going to take for us to survive our coming challenges? And what can we do to support the earth at this time? How can we work together to usher in the changes that we need to make? What changes do we need to personally embrace so we can stand up to protect life for the coming generations? How can we ground these ideas into real world action that actually turns the tide and doesn't get stuck waiting for politicians to fix it? What are the most effective solutions to implement? And we will be sharing our perspectives and ideas on the subject. No one's going to really be, an expert to tell you exactly what to do, even though we all have ideas. And so when we come together and we share those ideas, we can start finding the erroneous ideas in what we share and kind of fettering them out. So we gain clarity and try to help each other, because if we come together and help each other, we really can create a phenomenal planet and something that works for everyone. And if you come into this with the spirit of wanting to work it out, the spirit of wanting to do the best for the planet, I can't see that we could fail, really. It just takes that heart opening. And by the way, if you're listening to this workshop live or via video now, please like and subscribe to our brand new YouTube channel, The Order of the Oak. And you can also find us on Facebook. Look for the bright green oak tree under our name, Order of the Oak. And links will also be posted here in the chat if you are on Zoom. This workshop is dedicated to creating solutions, to sharing and forming alliances, to exploring how we can support each other and work together, and to opening our minds and hearts into a more effective possibility. By sharing resources and solutions, we can make exponential progress. As a note, this conference will have the space for all of you to participate, to share your questions after our presenters speak. So please make note if something important comes up for you while you're listening, as really the solution is for all of us to take part, for all of us to catch the spirit, for all of us to take responsibility, for all of us to bring our hearts. And I really want to say a big thank you to all our tech people here and John Raymer and the Sign Network for your support and for partnering with us in this grand exploration. We're now going to start, and we're going to begin with something that deeply touches us, ceremony, and an opening of our circle. And so I pass to Stuart.
Thank you, Maury. Okay, I'm just going to sort of take us through a fairly standard bit of opening of ritual, so that we open this space in a fairly standard Druid way, and we'll hold this space for the next few hours. So if you're all sitting comfortably, I'd like you to first take 3 breaths in through your nose, hold the breath, and slowly exhale through your mouth. Take a second breath in. Hold for a second and exhale through your mouth. And a third breath in through your nose. Hold for a second and slowly exhale through your mouth. Now, with your eyes closed, I'd like you just to imagine you're an oak tree. We are the order of the oak after all. Imagine your roots extend from your feet into the deep, dark earth, drawing up water and nutrients. Imagine your branches extend above your head into the sky above, capturing the sunlight and turning it into energy. Spirits of the east, of air, of the hawk of dawn and of spring, we welcome you. Hail and welcome. Spirits of the west, of water, of the salmon in the gentle stream, and of autumn, we welcome you. Hail and welcome. Spirits of the north, of earth, of the bear in the starry night, and of winter, we welcome you. Hail and welcome. And spirits of the south, of fire, of the stag, and of summer, we welcome you. Hail and welcome. Spirits of our places, of the ancestors, and of those people not yet born, great spirit, universe, one voice, the all that is, and of course the spirit of the oak, we welcome you. Hail and welcome. Please all help guide us in this conference today, and I now declare this conference open. Marie. Marie, you're on mute.
Our first speaker, esteemed Indigenous Sundance Chief Rueben George. After serving his nation as a director of community development, he shifted his focus to protecting a beautiful inlet and his territory from a proposed Kinder Morgan pipeline and tanker project as part of the TWN Sacred Trust Initiative. He has also been instrumental in overwhelmingly returning the salmon populations to the water in his region. Chief Rueben is a spiritual leader who was made Sundance Chief by Chief Leonard Crodog in South Dakota, former medicine man for the American Indian movement, sometimes called Chief of Chiefs. Rueben has become one of the best known voices in the media locally and internationally in the conservation and proposed Kinder Morgan pipeline and other related issues. Chief Rueben, can you share your insights with us about spiritual activism and how you came to accomplish your work, or anything that comes to your heart? The topic also regarding what are we going to need to do to set things straight and into balance and harmony on this planet, and how to work together to accomplish this. I really know that you're such, I mean, that is what you do on a constant basis. So any of the stories that you tell us, anything that you will be offering will dovetail perfectly into this. So feel free to speak whatever comes to you. Thank you.
Well, good morning. Can you hear me? Does that sound okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Well, ACM, HCM, CIA, HCM, Chief Scoot, Stans not to Slewitith, Chief Yupan, and Snot Slew to Squamish. I'm a family therapist, but I haven't practiced for about 12 years. Well, no, not true. I volunteer at a men's treatment program, and I have been the last 12 years. I do miss it. but I was lucky. I was able to incorporate our cultural values into all the programming that I did. My grandfather said, anything you learn in college and university about healing, there's a native teaching that says the same thing. I put that to the test in the mid-90s. When I was in my 20s, I opened up a healing center for youth, but we got a big grant, and I hired a couple psychologists and a bunch of elders, and we took psychological programs that were working in Indigenous communities, and we translated them into native culture, stories, legends, and teachings. And that was my thing for all along, is sort of traveling and sharing our program and helping people with theirs. And we'd take the program and translate it to their own culture. It's simple. The science teacher in Navajo country down there in the States was teaching kids, all Navajo kids, 90% were failing. He took his curriculum and he changed it to 100% be a Navajo theme, and he's a science teacher, but every lesson he did, he put Navajo themes to it. Within 6 months, 90% were passing. So with that idea and what my grandfather said, that's what I did. And it was pretty successful in rehabilitating and helping my own people. I worked in jails and correctional institutes and treatment centers and all over the place. I traveled throughout the States doing that. And I was lucky to do the same thing right in the pipeline. Up here in Canada, British Columbia was one of the first provinces worldwide to recognize the United Nations Declaration on Indigenous Rights as law. And so did the city of Vancouver. I was at both of those events. But with that in mind, free, prior, and informed consent, we've been working on that for a long time already. Within our traditional territory of Vancouver, which encompasses all of Vancouver and beyond that, anyone building in our traditional territory needs to have a Tsleil-Waututh Nation permit. So we do our dig and we look into make sure that there's no remains. We do historical study and make sure that it's good. We do an environmental assessment. We do a whole bunch of things. And then if they pass those things, we give them a permit. So Kinder Morgan, TMX pipeline, at first it was Kinder Morgan, is a $350 billion company. They didn't go through that process. They didn't ask for permission, or they didn't go through our processing. So we took them to court, but before we did that, based on Tsleil-Waututh Nation law, which is the core values of truth, family, health, and culture, with all those fundamentals of any religious and spiritual belief of love and honor and respect and dignity, pride, compassion, understanding, truth, and knowledge and wisdom. That's a foundation of humanity. That's how we're supposed to raise each other, with a foundation of our 4 points of our longhouse of truth, family, health, and culture. That's our law. So we with that law, we created a 1,200-page assessment on the Kinder Morgan pipeline. We work with world-renowned experts in their fields that helped us with that. We did a spill analysis. We did a clean analysis. We did multiple economic studies because the price per barrel fluctuated so much, especially during COVID. If you remember, the price per barrel went under $0. And so we did all that, and we even did an air quality test. And then we took all that information and we went to court and we sued them and we won. So then they started going again, and they tried to correct some things, and they started, and then Canada ended up buying it. And even through that, I went to the Kinder Morgan AGM multiple times. My family, but my kids about 4 times each, and myself, and went to United Nations and explaining this. And what was good about that actually was that all the information that we had, that we collected, we shared it with Indigenous people all over the world. And I traveled that too. I went to different places in the world and shared our model and what it was based on. And then they sold it to Canada because nobody would buy it. Our campaign was to discourage any investor because it was a stranded asset, that it wasn't profitable. Based on their analysis themselves, on in a time period of 7 years, they said it would take 20 years to pay off that 7 years of debt that would be accumulated while building the pipeline. Now it's 21 years it's going to take, and actually our own analysis says it'll be 22 years, so it's going to take 60 years to pay off. So we explained that to all the investors, so nobody would buy it. So Canada ended up buying it, and then we took them to court again, but we lost. And this was the hard thing to swallow, is because we actually won, but we lost. Because our arguments that we brought up were saying, you know, you're going to kill the orca whales. And they said, yeah, that's true. You're right. Your analysis is right. They're gonna die. And I said, your economic, and we argued that Canada's economic analysis was wrong. And they said that too. Yeah, to Tsleil-Waututh Nation, you're right. Canada's wrong. Then they turned around and said, but we're still going to side with the best interest of Canada. Well, this is crazy. This isn't just. And then our submissions, I think ours was about 700 pages, and I can't remember what Canada's were, to the Federal Court of Appeal, the 3 judges, just below Supreme Court. We submitted all of our information to them, but we of course we have to share it with who are fighting. So we shared our information, our submissions to Canada, and they shared and they sent us theirs. But we sent them a hard copy, and they took notes on that hard copy document. We could see them, and then they took those notes and they put it in their own submissions. So we went to the 3 judges and say, hey, look, they copied us, they submitted it, they agree with us. It's a bad idea. The project's not good. They agreed with us. And the judges said, well, we're not going to look at that. So it was discouraging, but we sort of felt this because the Canadian courts are only a branch of Canada. And what they protect is pipelines. And it happens all over. I'll show you some things here. My son's girlfriend, she put on a dinosaur suit, and she climbed the Kinder Morgan or TMX fence and played badminton. This is her right here. And she's going to jail right here. You know, she's on the right. You know, and what was brutal about that is they, you know, I worked in the court system, and I seen people with 20 charges of break and enter and caught, and they never received jail time. She started university when she's 16. She's got a degree by the time she's 20. She's went to school, got working on a second degree. She's 24 years old. She's a good kid. And she climbed a fence with a dinosaur suit on, like, you know, and played mad badminton and infringed on the Kinder Morgan pipeline. But somebody who's, you know, does 20 break and enters and gets caught doesn't get no jail time. Because she did that, they gave her 21 days in jail. And they told her straight out, said, every time you do that, it's going to get worse. And it's going to get worse. And so she's in jail right now. And that's what we're dealing with in Canada. But we stopped it though for 11 years, and we discouraged 21 insurance companies because they need insurance to build it. We're going at the banks too again. We're going at the banks and exposing them, and it's hard work, but it's worth it because Tsleil-Waututh means people, the inlet. There's the water right there. I can see it, and that's our mother, and we protect it because we work within our law. I think when we're born with no prejudice, no anger, no hate, no judgment, and you could see it in a baby. They love you just looking at you. They just love you. They don't see race or color or gender. They just see a human being. and they just love you. And those fundamentals I'm talking about, that's how we're supposed to raise. But what I see now today is that our world is lacking spirit, but it has to be guided properly. And, you know, not all ceremonies are good, but it has to be guided properly, and setting that intention is the most important in ceremony, to stick to those core values of what I talk about: love, honor, respect, because that's how I work. And I'm not perfect myself, and I'm not even a good example about how to be. I have a lot of dysfunction I have to work on, and that's a big reason why I still continue to go to ceremony. And it's the truth. But I'll move forward and work with people to try to be a better human being. You know, through ceremony, I was lucky enough that, you know, when I was in my addiction, I wasn't a good person, disrespectful to women and my family, and not a good dad. And, you know, and through ceremony, I was able to pray really hard and connect to Creator and give myself some freedom, because I sincerely said sorry. And that gave me freedom. But also all the bad things that happened to me and people hurt me when I was a kid, I sincerely forgave them, and that gave me freedom. And you know, so I do this, but I also, in my work, but I also do business now too, because what I feel is, you know, you need money. You need money to win. So we opened up I don't smoke at all. I use CBD, and that's the reason why we opened up some dispensaries. My kidneys went bad, and I started using CBD, and that's the only thing that helped me. And my pancreas, my liver too. and so we opened up 7 dispensaries, and we opened up a 30,000 square foot state-of-the-art grove. We did it in our own sovereignty. So meaning that there's a decision that happened up here. It's called the Chicolton decision. If you live on the land, you own the land for Indigenous people. But the sovereignty too is there's laws around that. There's sovereignty on the reservation, but there's sovereignty in our traditional territory. So in that, within that sovereignty, within our own Indigenous law, that's how we open up these dispensaries. And we eventually just got licensing after 2 years. Or 3 years, we got federal and provincial licensing. We're looking to open up more dispensaries. And then another thing happened that was really, really unexpected. And, you know, coming from the healing field and looking at the world and the state that we're in, it's really dysfunctional people that make choices for us. Like look at Trump. You know, the best thing the Republicans could ever do is get the biggest, loudest buffoon in there to distract everybody from all the crazy things that they're doing. And it's crazy because the biggest recipient of social assistance in the United States is old white men. And then the biggest category people that vote for Trump is old white men. But he's screwing them over. He's screwing everybody over. Unless you're making a couple $100 million a year, you're getting screwed. And that's the same thing in Canada, except Trudeau tries to look good, but he's just as bad, and he's making those bad decisions that only service a few people. And so what I see is it's lacking spirit. So even if I stop this pipeline, which we will, there's still 17 other pipelines coming from there. So I'm dipping back into the healing, and I'm going back into the healing, and I thought I'm doing something that I never thought I would do, because, you know, in my addiction, drugs and alcohol, and like 28 years sober now. But I started working with traditional medicines. Like I work at and volunteer at the men's treatment program, and they kept on falling off. And I said, they need help. And then I read an article on ayahuasca, and it intrigued me. Then my friend who's a doctor, she posted something on psilocybin. So I phoned her and I asked her some questions, and I said, hey, what is this? And she goes, it's helping people tremendously. And I was like, really, how? And she explained it all to me. So I went to my buddies who we opened up the dispensaries with, and I said, hey, look at this stuff. It's helping people. And he goes, I'm already on it. I've been working on it for 6 months. And so I went and talked to 4 different organizations that work in psilocybin, but we ended up working the people that we talk with. So we work with about a dozen doctors from neurology, psychology, psychiatry, MD doctors, NA doctors, and they started explaining the process of psilocybin and as a psychedelic to help people heal. And then we said, okay, let's explore that. For about 6 months, they kept on saying, you got to try it, you got to do it, you got to do it. And we wouldn't, none of us wanted to do it. And then finally, you know, I was sitting there in a meeting and you know, the teaching came up. You can't tell somebody what to do unless you're willing to do it yourself. So I did it. And, you know, I have, you know, once in a while depression, anxiety. And so I tried it and I said, I want to heal the trauma I don't remember. And I know this for a fact that in the field and working in this field for a long time, that, you know, generational pain is passed on. And what we believe is 7 generations. Studies show that medically it's 3 generations that we could prove. So what it's like an open wound. It's like an open wound on your arm. You might need stitches or something, but that's like a wound, because our society is set up to fix physical, mental, and emotional trauma, but it's not set up to fix spiritual trauma. And that's sometimes how it's passed down generation to generation. If you look at it this way, like all of you here, you love somebody. You love your kids, you love your husband or wife, you love your partner, whatever, you love somebody. And how that happens is 2 people come together and then they could fall in love, and that's a spirit. 2 people come together, a spirit comes out of that, and that's love. That's like smudge. You take any element of earth, fire, earth, water, sky, those elements, this energy, the sun, the earth, what you take that and you add any 2 elements together, or the same elements together, like smudge. You get sage and fire and you light it, and smoke comes out of that. But with intention, that's the spirit. And that's what you smudge yourself with. And I've seen those ceremonies all over the world. You know, they don't even, most of the ceremonies I went all over the world, they'd run it in their own language. But I knew it was going on because they're doing those things. They're lighting smudge or singing a song. You know, you physically have a spirit and the air has a spirit, sing a song. Those 2 things come together and form that spirit of a song. Happens over and over and over again in all these different types of ceremonies. So if you could have love, and that's a spirit. And remember I said psychology, modern, you know, they take your mental, emotional, and physical. But if you could fall in love and 2 elements come together, what if it comes together in a negative way? Somebody hurts you or abuses you. And then that's 2 elements coming together and forming a spirit of trauma. That's what that is. And it's like an open wound. And think of the trauma that your grandparents went through. That could be open wound. And one trauma that people don't recognize. And so spiritually, we close those wounds. But a trauma in itself is lack of spirit, genuine spirit. I mean, I'm talking about when we set the narrative for our ceremonies, love, honor, respect, dignity, pride, that's the things we talk about. When you go in my ceremonial house, my sweat lodge or sundance or whatever it might be, your spirit sits in the center of your being. And when you're comfortable, your spirit will expand to the size of my sweat. But what that is, it's pushing it out. You're pushing your spirit out. And you say you got something stuck in your head that could be related to trauma. If you keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing, eventually that trauma is going to shrink. And it might go away. So it might scar, like you might have a wound and spiritually you scarred it. So you healed it. And that's what we do. So in this ceremony, that's what we do. And it's a little bit different because in my Sundance, everybody starts where they're at. And the goal is for them to achieve a higher state of spiritual consciousness. That's like experiencing a little bit of heaven. And then that's where the real change starts. That's when you tune into who you believe in as God, and you tune into your ancestors, and you ask to create those changes. But there's a process. I'm going to go run a sweat lodge in a couple hours, and I teach there. I teach at the lodge. We do pipe ceremonies. We do vision quest. We do multiple different types of ceremonies, all leading to one ceremony, and that's the Sundance. Some people may take 10, 15 years to achieve a self-induced higher state of spiritual consciousness with no medicine. It may take them that long to get it. So what the difficult part is, I used to say this, don't take a medicine that brings you to a higher state of spiritual consciousness without getting there yourself first. I used to say that, but now I don't, because I help people with that. But the integration after you take this medicine with us is that we integrate those things that you should have learned at the sweat and the pipe ceremonies and the Sundance. All those things you should have learned before you got there. That's the integration. But so far we did about 60 residential school elders. My mom went to residential school and she witnessed horrific things. Like she witnessed a nun killing a child, kicking the child in the head, and it's brutal. My grandfather, Chief Dan George, he's nominated for Academy Award, and he wrote a couple of really good books. But when he went to residential school, he's 5 and he spoke his language. They cut off his finger for speaking his language. And it was brutal. It was brutal what they experienced, but what I witnessed is these traumas with the residential school survivors. We're open wounds. And it's not just my mom's generations, it's going 3 generations back of residential school. So they close the wounds of their grandparents to their parents and close those wounds to themselves. And I've seen amazing miracles, really good healing. So one thing I believe is that, I'm stopping that pipeline, that's good. And those people that are creating the pipeline have no spirit. I could teach spirit. And I think with the doctors that I'm working with, we could even do it with this. And that's our goal, is to change people, to have them to connect with something more beyond themselves. And we're having some pretty good success because we're getting some pretty influential people in government coming and wanting and being interested. We got a huge grant from Canada, a huge grant for 2 years to run psychedelic programs for residential school elders. We're making a documentary, and I'm just going to share it real quick. Is Les here yet? Do I still got lots of time?
Yes, you do. Keep going.
Okay.
So far you have 4 minutes or so just on your time. If you want to go into Les's time a little, that's fine too. But
okay, I'm gonna share this. This is our documentary. This is my friend Gabor Mate. Check this out.
In this country, it's illegal to deny the Holocaust. It's not illegal to deny the genocide of Native communities, which continues to traumatize.
Ruben, we're not seeing it. Are you trying to share the screen?
Denying their
Oh, sorry.
The developing.
yeah, you also have to share sound too, Ruben.
Okay, can you see that now?
Yeah, now we got it.
You ready? Tell me if you can hear it right away.
In this country,
Yes.
it's illegal to deny the Holocaust. It's not illegal to deny the genocide of Native communities, which continues to traumatize people. Because now you're denying their experience.
The developing story out of British Columbia, the remains of more than 200 children have been located, buried on the site of a former residential school.
We all knew there's bodies buried. It was all whispered about.
Our suicide rates are 3 to 6 times national average. 1 in 2 children in First Nation are born to poverty. Incarceration rates, depending on the province, could be 30 to 60% incarcerated. Yet we make up roughly 5% of Canada. So something's wrong.
They stripped me of everything. My language, my spirituality, my culture.
So the child is being traumatized. It's like it's going to last forever. The traumatized consciousness then takes that into adulthood. Instead, there's no hope. People who are meant to respect themselves and one another start to loathe themselves. So in each generation then hurts the next, and hurts the next, and hurts the next.
My people are having a real hard time all of them. And we really need something.
We don't want any more kids to grow up without their parents. And if we could use something to heal, I'm all for it. I'm all about saving lives.
There was a time when the world isn't like it is right now.
There was a prophecy that said that the Indigenous people would rise up again in knowing who we are. Our culture's never been lost, but we have been lost in the colonialized system.
So I dreamt of my mom, and I was telling her, gee, Mom, we lost our language, don't know any of our medicines. What are we gonna do? And she said, don't worry, you'll dream.
Our people have been guided to these medicines, this plant that has this healing power. When they use it, they're able to be grounded again and to have that spiritual connection with this life on Mother Earth.
To go back to my spirituality and my teachings, my culture. That's when I started to find out who I really am.
You are an answer to the prayers of our ancestors. You have a responsibility. Help your people. You know what to do. You know what to say.
We stand on the shoulders of our elders. They're our strength. And we have to put the next generation on our shoulders.
The strength that you carry is the same strength that we learned our culture from elders like you.
I know who I am today. I just slay what you woman.
But it's necessary that we as a culture turn to you for the healing. Because the healing principles embedded in your traditions and your culture are so much wiser, so much more connected.
I believe there's a path here with the plant medicines that can help heal us.
By learning how to deal with it, I want to learn how to love myself.
We're teaching each other some things that we forgot.
As you heal, it'll help heal this whole toxic society that we live in.
Nothing wrong with making good people better, and that's why we're here.
All my life I've been waiting for the good to happen. I'm sure that's what I've been waiting for.
So Thrive created that video and sorry. I'm trying to close that. Sacred Circle is the organization that we formed, and the first elder in there is she's a residential school survivor, and it was a touching story because she's like, because the trauma that she experienced, she was unable to hold her husband and hold her kids. And she said, I want to love my grandchildren and hold them. And one ceremony that changed. And then she got her whole family to do our program. All her adult kids, and now we're starting the grandkids. So far, over 10 of them have. And we put through about 60 elders that have similar stories that are changing. And we put through a guy in the States working with Army veterans. We work with a couple of different teams. And Phil Lane, my spiritual father, is people don't know this, but everywhere he lived, he got a degree, Harvard and Stanford, but they more know him as a spiritual elder. And that's good. But we work with each other too, and he put through this billionaire. He owned like a couple thousand acres in the States, and it was a hunting ranch. After one program, he said it's no longer a hunting ranch; it's a healing center. That's what he created, and that's what we want. We want to heal people but we want to deal with help influential people too. Like we did, Canada's funding this significant amount of money to do a study. And we already know what the outcome's going to be. But I work really hard. I work really, really hard in environmental issues. And it costed me my health. I did multiple stats. You know, they say your kidneys go bad because of diabetes or heart problems. I did so many tests that my heart's fine. I don't got diabetes. It was just stress. That's all they could relate it to. My kidneys and pancreas, my liver gave up. I was doing 12-hour days for about 4 years straight. No holiday. And I hurt myself 5 years. And this will stop this pipeline, but there's still 17 others. But I think we could do it this way too. I really feel, and all those guys that we believe, they're spiritual leaders in their communities, and they're former chiefs of their nations. And our sister, they're all leaders of their nation, but they're all spiritual leaders, but they're all educated too. They're all business people. And we all believe in this. And we all believe in creating change, and the people we work with, we love. You know, they wanted to help us, but what they ended up is getting more help from us, I believe, because we changed their lives too. When we set the narrative with the medicine, because anybody could do it. Anybody could do it. You could go get some anywhere you want and do it. But you need the cultural backing of those teachings. You need those fundamentals of what I'm talking about. Truth, family, health, and culture is Kosalish law. You need those. You need to set the narrative with love and honor and respect, because what happens is if love, honor, respect, dignity, pride, all those teachings of humanity I'm talking about, when you instill it in your being, but you have dysfunction in yourself. When you have dysfunction in yourself of greed, of anger, of hate, of racism, whatever it might be, when you have that and it's in you, it's a trauma, some sort. But when you go by when we set that narrative, your spirit listens. Physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, you listen, and you push that out of you, and you come out new. That's what we believe. And we're so new now that, you know, we're having a hard time keeping up with that. Almost 200 people that we helped. We don't have enough facilitators, but we're working on that. And that's why we're getting this grant to see that we could get more money. And great people like Gabor Mate, check his work out too. He's been doing it for, I don't know, 25 years, this psychedelic healing. Amazing guy. He's such a good guy. Check out his books, check out his videos on YouTube. And when he came to our ceremony, he's going to help us. And he looked at what we're doing, and he goes, you know what, I want to participate. So he ended up participating, and he walked away, and he was on Joe Rogan and different other shows. And he said, and he said this to me personally, he said, that was the most profound spiritual experience I ever had in my life, how you guys did it. And because we fill in those gaps. We already do self-induced higher state of spiritual consciousness with no drugs. And this is a gift that brings you there. But we incorporate those values of what I'm talking about that are important. We set that narrative, which is nothing but good intentions, which is very important. But if you try to run those ceremonies within your dysfunction, it doesn't work. And you can hurt people, especially yourself. And so it's a good thing. A lot of people want to work with us. A lot of people see and know what we're doing, and they really want to work with us. And so I'm still doing the environmental stuff. I got a book coming out. It's going to go into manufacturing in about 2-3 weeks. I was like, I don't want to do a book. And my buddy said, let's do a book. And I was like, told my son, I said, what do I do a book on? And he goes, it's easy, Dad. It's Star Wars. And I went, what? Star Wars? And he goes, yeah. He said, the Georges are the rebels and the evil empire is Canada. And I said, oh yeah, that's right. So we did a book, and the publishers think it's going to be pretty good. So we'll see what happens. And that documentary should be coming out pretty soon. And the sacred circle work we do is, if you want to look it up, is you know, probably do sacred circle, then throw in a couple of keywords of First Nation. If you look up sacred circle, a whole bunch of things pop up. But if you look up sacred circle and then you do First Nations and psychedelic healing, I'm sure you'll find it. You know, if you want to follow us on Kinder Morgan fight, TMX fight, it's Sacred Trust. And yeah, and you know, I get my strength because I believe in what we're doing. The spirit of what we do is important. Spirituality is simple. I just explained one part of it. You set that narrative for yourself and have the courage and strength to follow that, to change your patterns, to be a better human being. And why not? Why not love more? Why not be happier? Why not? It's simple. It's really, really simple. But it's changing our patterns that's difficult. And I get longevity for doing it. I'm doing from ceremony, and I've been in ceremony for about a month straight. And I got one more month to go, and then I'm done our winter ceremony. But in between, I still go do my sweat lodges. I'm going to go and run a sweat pretty soon, and that's the longevity. You know, and my friend, she's joking, but it was serious. And she goes, I know why you pray all the time. And I go, why? And she goes, you'd probably be crazy again if you didn't. And that's true. I'm not doing it because I'm a holy person. I'm doing it because I don't want to go backwards into the dysfunctional person that I was. And like I said, I'm not a good example about how to be, and how I teach in my ceremonies sincerely I have a lot of elders and brothers and sisters that help me, and aunties and uncles. I have lots. And our goal is to teach people to surpass us. If we're not doing our job unless you're surpassing us, my kids, they teach me now. They teach me, and that's our goal of how we should create a community. And I have like about 800 people that come to my Sundance, and more in the winter ceremonies, and it's a beautiful life. It's hard, but it's good. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Rueben. Really appreciate that. There's so many points that you made that are so important. Even the colonialism and what has been created, and this system that possibly is not really in harmony with our heart, of having, somebody at the top and everybody flailing at the bottom, etc. The question is this serving our heart? And maybe the people that had originally put this in to the consciousness, we're coming from trauma, and how do we heal that trauma within ourselves so we can move into a place where we can really do what's in our heart for the best for all concerned, and everybody win. And that's to start bringing that about. How do we start bringing that about? How do we open hearts? How do we work together to make sure the earth stays in a way that we would want to hand it down to our children? And something that is really important that
Can I make a comment on that one part?
Yeah, sure, of course. Because we have I would like to open up the chat for questions for Rueben. He can comment on that while that's happening. So if you have any questions for Rueben, please start putting them in the chat. Go ahead, Rueben.
So Gabor alluded to it a little bit. Well, a lot. He said following Indigenous culture is going to, and watching you heal is going to help us heal. And that's a key thing. In the ugly society we live in today, there's consistent, constant trauma. Atmospheric rivers, floods, droughts, fires, addictions. You get people dying, shootings everywhere, in daycares and high schools and everywhere. That's a consistent and constant trauma, and we normalize these things. And so when you look at that story in that video, what we change it to, it's like a sad story when you see that. All those horrible things happen, residential school survivors. But how we're making the movies, that don't look at it as a sad story for the Indigenous people. Look at it as a story for hope for yourself. there's lots of trauma, and you're not immune to it. And we have to heal ourselves. You know, one of the hardest things that I deal with people in the sweat lodge is people who haven't had spirit in their life. And it's not just their own life, it's multiple generations of no sincere spirit. That's trauma. That's an open wound that people need to heal and scar, like maybe their grandparents or parents and didn't have spirit in their life. And, you know, and I'm talking about that sincere stuff, like that, setting that good narrative and pushing out the things that don't match. I just had a comment.
Thank you. Someone's saying in the chat, could you restate the handle where we can follow you? They would like to follow your work. You're muted.
I'll put some things in the chat.
Okay, great. Does anyone else have questions they want to pose to Chief Rueben? I know that, you know, something that you've talked about over the years, and because I know you so well, but is the fact that in our spirituality, sometimes we compartmentalize things, and what that means is we'll say, oh, I'm a healer, or I'm a this, or I'm a that, and then we don't do the other part of it, like, oh, I'm a healer, so I won't do activism. I'm something or other, you know. In Indigenous ways, we do what's appropriate at any moment. And so what happens is, if somebody was going to pour a whole bunch of poison in the water, we don't just sit there and wait for somebody else to do it. We take action because we see that that's part of us, that's going to affect part of us. And we take it as a clan, take action as a clan, so it just doesn't involve one single person doing everything, just totally burnt out completely. But how do we work together in that way so we can, you know, help each other? Because then maybe a few people will do something, but it's a concerted effort. It's like an effort where we know what's obvious and what needs to be done. And instead of just saying we're a healer, or we're this or that, we're everything. We have the ability to be everything. I mean, we still have to cook our dinner and stuff. So we're a cook too, and we're, you know, and if we need to grow crops, we're going to grow them, you know. So the thing is, yeah, some people can specialize a little bit more, but to bring ourselves into alignment with knowing that we have the ability to respond at any moment to the situation. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, Crow Dog was the real deal thing. He did a lot of miracles. He did beautiful miracles all the time. But he'd never ever call himself a shaman or a medicine man. I work with guys from Central and South America, and they'd never call themselves a medicine man or a healer. They'd never do that. And I don't, like, I didn't even call myself chief for the first 10 years I was chief, because I'm just Rueben. I'm not an elder or nothing. I'm not a healer. And I don't restrict myself by putting titles on myself, because we all need to grow. And but like, I think one of your points is, all my spiritual stuff is everywhere in this house. And you know, when I do ceremony a lot, but if I need a goal and a vision idea, if there's a problem with my kids, my family, my community, the Kinder Morgan fight, the Trans Mountain fight, like, we have to be innovative. And we did this. We did this, and so we'd sit in our spiritual room, and we'd pray and pray and pray and pray and pray, until we found a way to fix my family, a way to fix our community, to have a vision and goal for our community. You know, my uncle taught me that, because when he became chief in Tsleil-Waututh 30 years ago, there's only a secretary and himself as the chief on the payroll. he created a vision and idea by praying in a room. And he got us to the point where we got economic sovereignty, economic independence. You know, we employ over 250 people. At one point, we had 0 unemployment. Now we'll hover around 3% of unemployment, below any national average. And, you know, the goal was to heal our community. The goal was to have economic independence. The goal was to have more culture and more spirituality in our community. But he found a way. That's my point. And I do that. And actually, all the staff that I work with, they do that. Yes, they do a really good job, because I have two law firms that we work with, and they come to ceremony. And we have 2 policy analysis people. They're just brilliant. They come to ceremony, but they find a way. They find a way that to go after the insurance companies, go after the banks, to go to United Nations. We find a way. We find a way to expose them. We find a way, because when you start to think of that and you pray on it for so long, you know, it got to the point I was like, everything when we're praying for it happens. I prayed, I said, I want to debate Richard Kinder of Kinder Morgan, who owns the pipeline. And 2 days later, I got a call, and they said, hey, do you want to go to the AGM in Houston, Texas, and the Kinder Morgan AGM? I said, yeah. They said, well, pack your things really quick. You got an hour to get to the airport. We're booking your flight. I said, yeah, okay, cool. So I went and debated him, and it was really great. It's really great, but I was finding a way. So when you think of yourself, it takes practice. Every single day, I pray every single day to find a way, to make things better and to find a solution. ACM.
Yeah, I think that real briefly on that, you had, and this is just going to be very inspirational for people. You had this incident where a hummingbird came in from prayers, and I don't know if it became part of the tree network or something in the area, but what happened is in 2 sentences, tell me if I'm wrong here, but the hummingbird, because of the prayers, shut down the action that was happening on the corporate level and made it so an area was protected so it would stop something. So you never know what will come into your aid, you know, to see this as a multi-dimensional situation instead. So
yeah, that was some of our allies. They're really good. They like, there's laws in Canada that you can't disrupt migrating birds' existence here. So the hummingbirds came from South America, Central America, and they flew all the way here, and they nested on the route of the TMX pipeline, and they found them. Our allies found them, and they halted all construction for 4 months. So we did that with also the salmon when they're spawning, and so those things those things work. A mighty hummingbird stopped a multi-million-dollar. I think they spend about 70 million a month, so it stopped it.
I think somebody was asking about how to accelerate helping people connect with spirit, and maybe we can make this short. I think we need to move to the next speaker, but do you have any suggestion on that?
What was the question?
How to help people connect with spirit. How can we accelerate that happening on the planet among people that maybe are not doing that?
You know, I pray and pray and pray and pray. And, you know, you could do simple ceremonies, you know, anywhere there's water, you could pray. The colder it is, the better in the way I see it. Go jump in the ocean. But that's the thing too, is like when you go in the cold water, and, you know, in the Cree way, I'll explain that a bit. When you go in the cold water, you know, like a baby when it cries, it goes, and that's what the water does to you. So it's doing something for you. But in the Cree way, if you go to the ocean, look where the water's coming from. If you go to the river, you look where the water's coming from, and you face it. And you ask the water spirit to help you face your fears. And then you do a couple dunks. Then you just look down, still facing out, and look where the water's going away. Like to the shore or down the river. Just look down and you ask the water spirit to take away any hurt and pain and negativity, and you do a couple more dunks. But what else is happening there is because your breath is getting pushed. You clench and unclench your body, and you push out those things that are not part of it. And if you're looking for something, pray really hard to find a good place to go and pray, because some aren't good. Like I tell people, even at my own sweat lodge, if you're disrespected by me in any way, you have permission to leave. Don't take any disrespect from anyone, especially in ceremony. You're not obligated to stay anywhere. If it's abusive in any way or you feel disrespected, leave immediately, including my ceremonies. I'm not like that, but if I happen to be grumpy or anything, you don't need to take it, especially in ceremony. You should always leave feeling joyous. You can pick and choose. You're going, if you feel BS, don't stay. But I pray for that. Wherever you're at, just pray to find a good place to pray.
Well, thank you very much. This has been wonderful, and I want to pass to Stuart to pass to Dana. If she is Dana available? And maybe we'll bring in Patricia later if we have some more time. But
and sorry, I have to go run my sweat lodge.
okay.
But I really appreciate you, and sorry, Dana, I didn't get to hear you, but love and blessings to you. I have to go in a couple of minutes, but I'll probably try to answer a couple of chat things, and then I'm going to go. But blessings to you all.
Thank you so much, Rueben.
All right, take care. I'm going to mute.
Thank you, Chief Rueben. So our second speaker, Dana O'Driscoll. Before we get in there, do start thinking of questions as the speakers are speaking, and we'll open the chat up at the end of each session so that you can type some questions in there. So so the chat isn't distracting. That's the whole point of leaving it to the end. So Dana O'Driscoll, welcome. Dana's Grand Archdruid of AODA, which is just the best title ever, isn't it? Grand Archdruid. Permaculture designer, homestead author, known around the Druid community for practical actions and application of knowledge. Has a fantastic book out a few months back, which is just wonderful. Dana, talk to us.
All right. Well, I'm not great speaking off the cuff, so I have a presentation for you. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. So thank you, really appreciate. I just want to start with some gratitude, just obviously to the land that sustains us out here. We are in Western Pennsylvania, which is the traditional land of the Susquehannock. And right now the maples are running, and we are collecting the maple sap in a very ceremonial and honoring way and drinking it each morning. And of course that produces maple syrup. So it's just really wonderful here. So I just really want to thank everyone for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to share today. And of course, gratitude to the living earth and all that sustains us and all the spirits of the earth. So I just want to tell you a little bit about me. I am an animist bioregional druid. I live in Western Pennsylvania in the United States. And I live in an area that is really quite difficult here. I live in an area that's been a major extraction zone through 3 centuries in Pennsylvania. This is where we have natural gas fracking, mountaintop removal, mining, 3,000 miles of acid mine drainage, forests, unsustainable logging, coal power plants, nuclear power plants, you name it, it's here. And so I sort of consider myself on the front lines of some of like, okay, these are the worst things that could be happening to the land. But also my family, I'm a white person, completely white, and my family has been here for 3 centuries, which means that the entirety of the history of this land where I live has been my family engaged in extractive activities. So a lot of what I've tried to do in my life is say, okay, how can I repair some of this ancestral damage? What can I do to live my life differently so that I can create a new ancestral tradition that is better and different? So that gets me into permaculture design and wildcrafting and rewilding and herbalism, and living on a 5-acre farm, and doing just anything I can do to support the land. But that also means that for some reason they put me in charge of the AODA. And the AODA is a global Druid order that we also focus a lot on practical action and on ecological, like really focusing on helping people reconnect with their local landscapes and learn how to build a spiritual practice surrounding their local ecosystem. I'm also a member of OBOD, as some other people are here, and I was one of the Mount Hamas Scholars a couple of years ago. And of course, I'm the author of a couple of books and oracles and so on. And so those are my handles there at the bottom. So I'm going to be talking from these 2 books today, Sacred Actions, and actually the Sacred Actions Journal, which just came out last week. And I'm sort of going to provide an overview of the philosophy of it and sort of what it is, and then kind of deviate in a couple of places as well. Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit about the problems and sort of what led me to come up with this concept and sort of these things. So obviously I've talked about my own context here, living in an area that's extremely extractive and having this sort of burden of ancestral legacy and saying, wow, like, what can I do to change this? How can I support Indigenous communities? How can I support white people and anyone who's here who wants to figure out what to do? So obviously our daily lives is earth destroying. And we can't say it any other way at this point. Like, we've gone too far, maybe 20 years ago people could deny it, but we can't deny we're in a climate crisis and we're facing the 6th mass extinction. We have a lot of global leaders who are engaging in lots of talk and no action. And we sort of have this exploitive relationship that most of Western civilization has developed with the earth. So then you enter something like Druidry or nature spirituality, and you're like, wow, nature is awesome. Nature is great. I honor nature. And then I'm going to drive my gas guzzling SUV to a terrible job. And there's this major conflict, right? You end up having this challenge where you're like, wow, what can I do? And then of course you have somebody like me where I have my own positionality and my own ancestral history. How do I undo these terrible colonial legacies? How do I undo this legacy of extraction? And I know that we've got people all over the globe, but this is something that a lot of Druids here in North America that are both a colonized religion, but also colonizers themselves face. And so we really need to sort of think about how do we address this, right? But there's also an inner dimension to this. Not just aligning inner beliefs with outer actions, but thinking about relationship with nature. I've kind of become convinced over the process of my own evolution that if I did not make so many direct physical lifestyle changes to do what I could for the earth, I don't think that some of the deep spiritual experiences that I have with the land would be open to me. In other words, I think that nature will always interact with anybody, but if you start really walking that walk and not just talking that talk, I do feel like, and recognizing that I'm not separate from nature, I'm part of nature. I can learn from nature, but I also have to show up and do my part. And that's not me leaving a little offering by a tree to say thanks. That's me living my life in a way to say thanks. And finally, of course, just how do I become a good ancestor? My ancestors weren't great ancestors to this land and to me. And how do I become a better one to future generations? And that includes all life, not just human life. So these are sort of the background through which I really think about this. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about animism, because I actually feel like animism is a gateway into so much thinking about sustainability and sustainable living. And the more you put these things together. And so the way that I've been taught is all things come from nature. Everything has spirit. And we've just heard that in the talk, of course. Spirits can be worked with, learned, and honored. And a lot of this to me is, how am I in right relationship with these spirits? So, how am I in right relationship with plastic, one-use plastic, which has its own spirit? How am I in right relationship with something I would consider waste? How can I honor the sovereignty of trees when I need to cut some down to build a house? And starting to really think about, if everything has spirit, how can I interact with those spirits in a right relationship? And so I find that framing some of these philosophies and animism is a really helpful way of saying, okay, it's not just that I want to do good because I want to do good. It's because I want to build a different relationship with nature And so I really want to do good because I want to build a relationship with these spirits. So that's kind of some of the ways that I've begun to, this is more evolved thinking than I wrote my book, which my book took about 5 years to publish after I finished it. So some of my new evolved thinking, if I ever make a revision to the book, this will show up in it. So this is the Sacred Actions Wheel of the Year. So what I did is I took these issues and I basically put them in a wheel structure, which is really common and comfortable for neo-pagans and a lot of people practicing Druidry and other earth-centered religions, particularly those accessible to white people like me, right? They're not appropriative. And I created basically this concept of sacred action. So sacred action is recognizing that we can live in a sacred manner in our daily lives. We don't have to live our lives separated from nature, but rather that every choice is an opportunity to engage in a care-based relationship with nature and a regenerative, a healing-based relationship with nature and not an exploitive one. Now, that's really hard because the entire system is based on exploitation. But that's the idea. So we can engage in sacred action, we can build this into our lives, and we can focus on different pieces of it as the wheel turns. And we don't obviously have to do this all at once because that can get really overwhelming. So I'm just kind of going to go through some of the ways that this can happen and go through each of these and then share a couple of other things and then we can open it up for questions. So at the winter solstice in this wheel, we think about the ethics of care. And I actually pull this from permaculture design. I add my own spin on it, I add my own animist spin on it. But permaculture design has this beautiful, wonderful ethic that I think is extremely potent. And it becomes like a heuristic. So you can say, oh, okay, I need to do something. How can I engage in earth care for the earth, recognizing the sovereignty and dignity of all life, recognizing that humans' original purpose was being caretakers of the land. And I got that from Tyson Yunkaporta's Sand Talk, which is one of the best books in the world if you haven't read it. How do I engage in people care? How can I take care of the human communities, my family, myself? How do I only take what I need? That's fair share. How do I distinguish between a want and a need? How do I recognize that, hey, consumerism and materialism are identities that they want to force on me that maybe I don't want? And then, of course, the animism piece here is how do I also be spirit aware? So how do I do these things while also engaging in ceremony and interacting with spirits and recognizing that that is an important part of ethics? So we move into Imbolc, which we, of course, are celebrating right now, with yesterday being the astrological Imbolc. And in the Wheel of the Year, in this system, this is all about reskilling. So we as human beings have learned how to tend our own needs. And in doing so, we've actually removed ourselves from the land. So ancestral skills, honoring our ancestors. How do we provide some of our basic needs? Maybe that means growing some of our own food. Maybe that means learning to mend so that we are consuming less. I have foraging here. This is, I teach a lot of wild food foraging around my region. It's one of the ways I've found that I can really engage with a very conservative public group of people. I don't do a lot of public ceremony or anything like that because where I live, it wouldn't happen. But this is a way that I teach some of these things and thinking about these sets of skills. So they can be lots of things. But it's basically saying, how can I work with nature to learn how to provide some of my direct needs from nature, rather than letting an extractive system do that for me? So the foraging example here is when I teach wild food foraging, I think about the difference between, in my ecosystem, we have common milkweed, which is now becoming more and more endangered. And we have plights with butterflies, monarch butterflies, and all of these things. So I teach people how to gather seeds and seed their own patches of milkweed. And then I teach them how to eat it once they've built a patch of milkweed. Unlike, say, multiflora rose, which is in my ecosystem, really, I don't like the term invasive. It's a very opportunistic plant. So we eat as much of that and harvest as much of that as we can anytime we've seen it. So we're learning how to build our skill set, and we can use both of these plants for food and medicine. But the way we treat them depends on sort of our knowledge base. So that's just a little bit about reskilling. Okay, so the spring equinox is thinking about our relationship to waste and consumerism. So the driving engines right now of progress, right? Thinking about really doing this. This one requires a lot of reflection because a lot of us have been so socialized to buy it immediately or to see our identities wrapped up in the things we buy. And so recognizing sort of the inner and outer dimensions of this. And of course, recognizing that waste is a resource, and working to sort of decenter a consumer identity so that we can become whole people and we can become more than defined by what we consume. And of course, that allows us to cultivate an actual inner life and all of these things. I have a photo here. This is my gander Wittershins. And he is helping me make an eco brick. So eco bricks are made with this is non-recyclable plastic. This is like all the films and things that you get. You often don't even know you're going to get it, and you get a product and then it's wrapped in plastic on the inside or whatever. And if you smash all of this down into a 2-liter bottle, you can create a building brick. And there are sites all over the world that will take these building bricks and put them into structures. Like the Pittsburgh Zoo near me has a whole wall they're constructing, and they'll take as many of these bricks as I can build. So I'm essentially then seeing this waste that would go into a landfill, I'm now turning it into something that can be used, and that all of that waste can be locked up. And that is a sacred thing. I am treating that plastic in a sacred manner by saying, how can I give you a second life? How can you be turned into a resource that can be used? Beltane. Beltane really focuses on the home and the hearth, recognizing that our homes are sacred spaces, and therefore when we are engaged in our daily living, everything that we're doing in our daily lives, our water consumption, our energy consumption, how we eat, what we cook with, how we light our homes, all of those become things that we have an opportunity to engage in more sacred ways. And of course, every person lives very differently. So what my sacred action in my home looks like would be really different from yours. So one of the things that we've put a lot of energy in is working on cooking and finding alternative cooking methods. So this is actually an earth oven that we've built on our property over the last couple of years. It takes a very small amount of wood to heat because it's very well insulated, and it's built with all materials that we have either here on the land, like all the cob, all the clay is from the land, or broken pottery from our house, and old wine bottles and things are in there for insulation. And what we actually do is once we fire this, it will bake for us with a tiny bit of wood for 10 hours. We can literally do a whole week of baking in this one oven. So we've radically reduced our energy consumption by using this oven. And it's literally just, we get sticks that fall from trees, and we don't even have to harvest any wood. We just go around and pick up the sticks as they fall. So this is a great example of like a way that we were able to really reduce our fossil fuel consumption for cooking, and also create community and create spaces for people to share. So that's an example of home and hearth for us. The summer solstice thinks about food and nourishment. So recognizing that as long as we are in an industrial system, industrial systems are exploitive. It doesn't matter if you're eating a tomato or a piece of chicken, they still have death and exploitation tied to them. Pineapple is one of the worst things you can eat. It literally destroys entire ecosystems. So even though it's not an animal product, it's still a problem. So in this, we try to think about, okay, how do I eat locally? How do I grow my own food? How do I learn about where my food comes from and maybe create more regenerative practices surrounding food? How do I create deep gratitude practices so that I can honor the food and where it comes from, even if I can't control everywhere, because maybe financially I can't afford more ethical food, I can't afford organic food, but I'm at least going to honor that food. And there's a loaf of bread that came out of our oven. So, these sorts of things we think about at the summer solstice. Lunasa. So this is where we move into our local ecosystem. And this is a part of this that I feel like I have like a really strong feelings about, generally speaking. How do we tend the land around us? How do we take our land from consumptive spaces? Like a lawn is a space that consumes fossil fuels. It consumes resource, rather than making it into a productive space, like where there can be habitat, where there can be food, where there can be birds, and all of these things. And I'm going to share a little bit more here, because this is an area that I've worked on because of where I live, and because of these ancestral challenges I have. I've really spent a great deal of my own time and energy thinking deeply about land healing and tending the land and honoring the land. and thinking about different ways that we can do this. So heart spaces, opening our heart spaces, bearing witness. So the forest down the street is getting cut down. What do? I can't stop it. It's already happening. Can I watch? Can I hold space with those spirits? Can I go engage in ceremony to support that land during and after? Those sorts of things. I talked a lot about action already, but also this idea that we humans are a tremendous force for good. We have the capacity to regenerate. We have the capacity to scatter seeds. And a concept I've written about this on my blog, and I have a book coming out next year that talks more about this, is this concept of refugia. We can create spaces for life to thrive. And even if life isn't thriving in all of the land around us, we can create a pocket of life that can thrive in these difficult circumstances. So that's just, really to get in deep, and I could talk about this all day. I guess this is sort of my core practice, is really thinking about land healing and land regeneration. This is sort of what we're doing today, the fall equinox community in the broader world, right? How do we bring people together? How do we help our broader communities actually transition? It's events like this. It's going out in our community and sharing what we can. Recognizing that there's so much more need for leadership that has an earth care orientation and not an exploitation orientation. And at Samhain, which is our final part of the wheel, is also examining ourselves and our ritual uses. We don't want spiritual practice to be another consumer identity. So how do we craft our own spiritual tools? And I'll point here to plants like Palo Santo, frankincense, sandalwood, white sage, aloes wood. All of the big plants that you would go buy at your metaphysical shop are all on the endangered species list. Why are they on the endangered species list? Because these were traditional plants used by traditional spiritual people for spiritual purposes that have now been appropriated more broadly. So how can you learn what's in your own ecosystem? I have beautiful white pine and Norway spruce trees on my property, and they produce a wonderful resin that I can harvest, and I know how much I'm harvesting, and I can harvest with ethics and gratitude and permission. And now I'm not taking the frankincense that belongs to a different culture and that's been exploited and over harvested. So I think that this is a really important dimension that we often don't talk about, is how does our spirituality become either a healing identity or one of consumption? And I'm framing these in either or. They're not really either or, but for as short as amount of time as I have, there's a lot of gray area. But just a couple of other things. Thinking about meaningful lifestyle changes and things that matter. You can get really, really excited about all these sustainable things, and you can kind of go off the deep end and then create a bunch of things that actually aren't sustainable. So my suggestion is small, slow, make one positive lifestyle change, keep it going. And then when you've got it going, start another one. Don't try to do a million things at once unless you think you can. If you're going to radically change your whole life, then maybe you can. But really, this drawing here I made is you are climbing the mountain, and it's okay to take some meandering. Your goal is to climb this mountain to become a better ancestor that is nurturing and care oriented and earth oriented, but recognize that you're starting at the bottom and it's going to take time to climb. Find others who are working on the path. Recognize that this is sacred activity, that you can ritualize these things, that you can create all of these ceremonial practices in your life to really build these things in. And of course, recognize that many solutions that are presented to us culturally are to buy more, and we want to sort of resist that. And finally, ceremony and ritual and regeneration. I really want to just really thinking about what is the sacredness of all things, to go back to that principle of animism. What is the spirit and those things, and how can I respect and honor and engage? So compost, that's a sacred thing. I have conversations with my compost pile. My compost pile tells me, okay, it's done. I'm done. Leave me alone. We start a new one, this isn't just me dumping food waste into a pile. This is me engaging in ceremony with my compost pile. We talk, we have almost, weekly conversations. And this is it's such a different dimension than me just composting. Suddenly I'm communicating with the soil web of life, and I'm part of that regenerative cycle. And of course, recognizing that as soon as you start doing these changes, like you can keep spiraling, and that, you know, you've got a lot of spirals in the art I'm sharing today, because it's just like this deepening practice. You can just keep going, and every time you do this, your relationship with the land changes. And I think that's really important for all of us. So thank you so much. I hope that was interesting to you. And I will stop sharing, and happy to take some questions or have some discussion.
Dana, thank you. That was superb. If we could open the chat to questions. Thank you. That was absolutely brilliant. And I just love the idea that you're chatting with your composters.
Oh yeah, talk with your compost. Talk with the one-use plastic and see what the one-use plastic says.
While people are typing and forming their questions, if I could start with the question, really. You talked a bit about the colonialization and the history, and the awful history that us as white people have raged on the planet effectively. And you've talked a little bit about how that might start to change, but you also said within your community it's quite a white conservative area. Yeah. And given the time constraints to do some stuff, how do we accelerate that? How do we engage with people that just do not want to listen?
Okay, so I think it's really important that we meet people where they are. Okay, so I have this problem. When I lived in Michigan, I started a permaculture meetup, which is still going strong, like 10 years later. But I moved back to Pennsylvania saying, oh, I'm just going to start a permaculture meetup. We'll all get together. We'll talk about permaculture, how to transform. We were doing like all this, like we would go to a person's house with 30 people and transform the lawn into a garden in like one day. You know, it was so much fun. And I get out here and like, nobody even knows what permaculture is. They don't care. A lot of the local farmers think it's an affront that we're doing all of this farming without without fossil fuels, which is what we're doing here in our land. And so, you know, I had to say, okay, well, where can I reach people in my community? Because I live in one of these really deep red areas. It's extremely conservative. You know, my neighbors have a militia, you know, like that's kind of where we are. We have hate groups in this area. And I also don't know if I'm very comfortable being out being a druid in this area. But what I discovered is that a lot of people are really interested in wild food foraging and plants. And so I decided, how do I help teach people how to not spray their lawn and respect the land and do some good? So I basically teach invasive plant wild food foraging. I don't teach them anything that's endangered. I teach them a whole bunch of things about their lawn. Okay, now they're not going to spray their lawn. Maybe they're not going to mow their lawn as often. I teach them how to eat multiflora rows, and I teach them about the acorns and the and we just like end up, that's where people want to be. And so it doesn't matter if I'm a druid, it doesn't matter what our politics are, but people like to go in the woods and they like to be able to eat things. And I'm teaching them the value of nature and showing them that they can have a relationship. And I give them that handout I showed you on the slide that's all about the ethics of foraging. So it's not just, hey, this is the Walmart of the woods. It's, hey, if you're going to take from this land, what are you giving back? Hey, here are some milkweed seeds. Why don't you scatter them for me? So, you know, it's this like, you have to meet people where they are and you have to figure that out. So like, it's not easy, but if I moved somewhere else, I would probably look completely different, you know?
Fantastic, fantastic. I'm just looking through the questions. What have we got?
There was one question for Dana. Someone asked if the slides would be available.
Yeah. I can post the slides on my Druid's Garden website. I can post them on my site, and I also can share them with you if you have links and things. So yeah, I'm happy to share those.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you.
Have we got any other questions? I've got a billion. I can keep going, but I don't want to hog it.
Go for it, Stuart.
Here we go.
Okay, I see.
Okay.
Kratos question.
So there's a long one about the animist question. What does it say? As a lifelong animist who sees spirits, can you allow that in the view of some animist materials synthesized chemically from non-animals like plastic do not possess spirits? Nonetheless, what can we do to avoid their use, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is the question, right? So the question is do things like cell phones and one-use plastics have spirit or not? And the argument that I would make, and you know what some of my own teachers have taught me, is in the end everything comes from the earth. So in the end everything has spirit. And I would say, you know, maybe take a moment to talk to that Pepsi bottle before you throw it in the recycle bin and see what happens. And then, you know, listen, you could believe what you want, but you know, I think, you know, see for yourself, I would say. So that would be one thing, right? Is sort of, you know, I think that a lot of people have no problem in accepting the fact that nature has spirit, but everything comes from nature. So here I am drinking out of this mason jar, right? This mason jar comes from nature. And just because it's a few steps removed doesn't change the fact that it comes from nature. And the longer that I interact with it, the more maybe we have our own relationship. So yeah, I mean, I think that it is a difficult question. I think that if you start saying some things have spirit and some things don't, then there's a lot of slippage there. And then it becomes a lot easier to ignore certain things rather than look at the whole system, right? The whole world as spirit. So what can we do to avoid their use and repurpose them? Yeah, I mean, I think that each of us has to, the thing that I've really have had help in my life is sort of looking at what's coming and looking at what's going out, and looking at where I can impact. So I didn't talk about this, but there's sort of like, in permaculture, there's this idea of zones, right? So zone 1 is the zone where we spend the most of our space. And meanwhile, like zone 5 is like out in the woods or in our community. And maybe I don't have a lot of control over zone 5, but I have a lot of control in my home. And, you know, I run a writing center at my job and I have a lot of control in that writing center. So I'm going to make sure that everything that I have direct control about doesn't have one-use plastics. And that's the way I'm dealing with it. So I think that each of us has to sort of look at our own unique circumstances in our own lives and say, where can we make the most leverage? And where would we get the most? Maybe for me, one-use plastics isn't the issue. Maybe it's the acid mine drainage down the road that's polluting the local river. And if I could actually do something about that, that's actually a better use of the limited time I have. And so part of this also is like, where does the most good need to happen and how do I leverage that? And maybe I'm just going to keep throwing things in the recycle bin and try to avoid them because I'm going to put my energy to the river that really needs my attention, for example. So that's what I'm saying. Like, we all need to sort of figure out how do we do this and how do we do this in ways that are sustainable for ourselves, which, you know, is different for every person. I live in the country and I don't live in a city. So I have really different kinds of things I can do, and I have to depend on my vehicle, and I don't really have a choice for that, where that's a different choice for other people.
Yes, that's thank you. That's that idea of trying not to boil the ocean, I suppose, is how we say it certainly in the UK. You know, you can't do everything, can you? And focusing one's effort is really important.
Well, and recognizing like that we're all doing good work and we're all here together. So like in AODA, the Ancient Order of Druids in America, we currently have almost 2,000 members. We're still a pretty small Druid order, but every one of those 2,000 members has committed to making 3 lifestyle changes at every degree. And they've all planted at least 1 to 2 or 3 trees. And so suddenly that's not so small, right? Like, and we're all having these conversations about how do we make these positive changes. And now we all do ceremonies on behalf of the earth 4 times a year. So suddenly my small impact for me here on my 5 acres changes when I start networking with others and seeing the good that they're all doing too. So I think that's like, it's not just about sacred actions is ultimately what do I have control over and what can I do, but also how can I connect with others so that I see that the little things that I'm doing, when suddenly 2,000 of us are doing, wow, that's actually a much bigger difference than me just doing these things. So finding like-minded communities, I think, and sharing and growing together are also really important pieces of this.
Excellent. Thank you. Do we have any further questions for Dana? Okay, I can't see anything going in the chat. Is Facebook required to sign up?
No, not at all.
AODA?
You could be an AODA and we have no social media. We don't care.
Well,
we do have a Facebook group, but we also have a Discord server and a forum. So, you know, you can use one or all 3 or none. Fantastic.
Thank you. Dana, that was fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. I can't see any more questions popping up. So huge thank you on behalf of everyone here. And please hang around. We've got a couple more speakers coming up. And yeah, I mean, the book. I've certainly read the first one. I'm looking forward to the second. So
Great,
it is just absolutely tremendous. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
have a comment.
Oh,
I love what you're saying, Dana. It's just to really allow yourself, like you're doing, to really reflect on what you're doing and as a person, and what the best way to put our time in, and this whole connection thing about when we connect with others, we can see what they're doing, and then it brings a bigger picture. And even with Chief Rueben, how they connect working in consort with each other. Sometimes we haven't quite done as much of that in the world. And so it's like us against the world when we're thinking that we're this separate thing, just kind of rallying against the world, versus how can we kind of see ourselves in partnership? And then if we communicate in partnership across those lines, and what can we bring together? Because as each one of us gets more of an idea on how to connect more appropriately or stronger to source and stronger to how we change the earth, that energy that we're cultivating is going to go out exponentially to other people, and it will be like something that just kind of takes fire. Suddenly it just happens, you know? And so what I see you're doing is just so powerful. And if you have any comment about that at all, that'd be great.
Well, it's actually interesting because I was thinking, and I have a friend here who is listening in, and we were actually, when we were listening to Chief Rueben, you know, we were talking about how happy we were that this was happening and how it's so exciting, because it's like, it's almost like anywhere I go. I mean, obviously, like I'm going to places like Eco Village, is like, let's be clear, right? I'm going to food forests. I'm not going to big consumptive places, right? But anywhere that I go, I'm hearing people have the same conversations, but they're using different frameworks. Like, so I have this conversation from a permaculture and druidry perspective, and from a perspective of somebody who is trying to really like decolonize, uncolonize my own thinking and behaviors, right? But I go and speak to a group of, say, herbalists, and they're talking about that same conversation through sacred plant medicine. Or I go and talk to a group of, you know, permaculture designers who don't necessarily want to deal with like the spiritual aspects I deal with, but that are really excited to like transform a 5-acre, you know, field into an oasis of life, right? And so I think that despite the fact that we have all of this mainstream media that is saying to us, bye, consume, these pipelines and these people have all the power, more and more people are really waking up to this. And to give you another example, since the pandemic started, our order has grown exponentially. Like we've had more, like we had, you know, we went into the pandemic with maybe like 1,300 members, and now we have almost 2,000. Last year we had like almost 400 new members or something. Like it's just, and we're not a big Druid order, we're a small Druid order, but it's like, and every person who's joining, like we get to see all the applications because they say, well, why do I want to be a Druid? And it's like, I need a lifestyle change. I love the AODA's ecological focus. And there's like so many people are waking up and they're yearning and they're recognizing. And I think as hard as the pandemic has been, it's also sort of been a disruption, like a tower moment. But now the tower has crumbled, and now people are saying, okay, that life didn't work. What can I do? And a lot of them are turning to nature spirituality. And I've talked to people in OBOD and ADF and other big Druid orders, and we're all seeing that same thing. There's like this explosion of people who want to learn how to connect with nature on a spiritual level. And to me, that's like such a positive sign, because wow, like that means that what we're doing is important. And I hope that everybody out there finds their own way of doing that, because we can find lots of ways back into nature. And then anybody who wants to experience that connection with nature will have a lot of avenues to find it. So yeah, I think that those data points are just like, oh, it's just so exciting to see that so many sort of people who, well, maybe they were interested before, but now they're taking the plunge, and that's like so exciting.
That is amazing. And the one other thing in that is even when you reach out to these other groups and you find an avenue in, like you were talking about in your area, maybe they don't want to be Druids or whatever, but you find an avenue into what interests them, then suddenly you are able to energetically be present for them and provide something energetically that might grow into something, and suddenly they start having their own ahas on it, and suddenly they start opening to all these other things. So
Yeah.
it's just providing that way in, and the want that all beings aren't suffering, and the way that, you know, that the earth can be, you know, fortified and honored. I see what you're saying is so beautiful, and I just really, my hands are up to you, and I thank you so much. It's just beautiful.
Can I share one more thing as like a final thing on this? Okay, so there's a local forest, White's Woods, that we've been fighting for 3 years to try to save from, you know, the conservative government who wants to cut it down and make like $1 million on all the tulip poplars. And me going in as a druid, and I'm open with these people like I do, and they brought me in as a wild food forager, but now they know I'm a druid, and it's been really interesting because I've been able to go in and identify, like do a bunch of physical things to help identify endangered plants that are in the forest that would be at risk, so we can sort of provide that to these assessors and things like that. But it's also neat because sometimes I've had more than one conversation with people about, well, can we do ceremony in that woods? What would that ceremony look like? And even though I haven't like brought that up, like I'm bringing to the table like the physical things that they're interested in. So we've done a bunch of plant walks, but I'm talking about these plant walks from like a place of reverence and a place of respect and honoring. And suddenly now they recognize there's more. And so some folks that have gone to those plant walks have come back to me later and now are interested in like, well, if I wanted to do something for White's Woods to help protect it, that, and they don't even know how to, they don't have the language, you know, but it is neat how, like, I do think even in more conservative and rural communities, like where I am, there are inroads, and it's just a matter of knowing the audience and knowing what you can say and kind of taking to the edge of that. And maybe some people take it a little further, and that's really exciting too. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your time and inviting me to speak today.
Thank you, Dana. That was fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you. Okay. Maria, I think I'm introducing the next one according to our list. Is that right? Fantastic.
Yeah, I think we should head into Harriet, and then if we have extra time in between, we'll go to Patricia if we have time, and then we'll go to Steve, I guess.
Okay.
We'll see what transpires, really.
See how it goes. See how it goes. So our next speaker is Harriet Sams. Harriet, are you on the screen yet? Can we bring Harriet's focus onto the screen? That'd be great. There's Harriet. Excellent. Harriet works as a tutor for the Tareki Trust 10 Directions, does ecotherapy training, Druid with OBOD, PhD researcher in archaeotherapy. I'm really looking forward to hearing a bit about that. An author, podcaster, public speaker, and so forth. Harriet, how do we save the planet?
Good question. Good opening question. I think firstly to just drop into that place of gratitude for listening to Chief Rueben and Dana as well, hearing the words and thinking, what am I going to say? You know, I just feel so honored to be in the presence of people who are already really walking with feet firmly rooted onto Mother Earth, and the ancestors behind them and the future generations in their gaze. And part of that means that my little humanness right now is kind of muted, because it's such a beautiful thing to see so many people already working with real devotion to whatever it is that the earth is bringing to them. Saving the planet, well, maybe I'll start a little bit smaller than that and talk a little bit about the idea of who speaks for the land. You know, the planet needs saving. Perhaps that's a narrative that's really powerful and really, you know, it galvanizes and motivates people for sure. However, perhaps I'm just a little bit long in the tooth and I feel I've spiraled, and so the land for me is speaking in a very nuanced and complex way. Just perhaps even reflecting what Dana was saying about, the plastic bottle having speech and communicating in some way, and that land in that bottle, as it were, although it has been through those cycles to move from the sort of petrochemical origins of it, but of course going right into its prehistory, Paleolithic understanding, it was a being in some way. That speech is speaking something, and I'm very much now just at the point in my process with activism, with psychological activism, eco activism, spiritual activism, where the land speaks to me really strongly. I lived during the COVID pandemic. I lived in a totally rural part of France because, to be absolutely honest, I was wanting to escape because I was feeling extreme overwhelm, I would say, with the state of British culture, of society, of politics, of the ecology, of the landscape. Every time I lived in a beautiful valley where nobody was really there, every time I had to leave the valley, I just felt the great acceleration, stifling. And so I left to go to France because there felt like I needed to escape. And as time went on, I realized that the land, my land, the land I grew up on, and and the ancestral land, perhaps in the loosest possible terms, was asking me to come back. And it was a conversation that started, and it was very much like having a relationship with someone who you didn't really want to hear what they had to say. Just come back. Oh, I don't want to come back because you're a mess. It's too painful. I'm in love with you. This is too painful. I'd rather be in my little place in France where, I can, hide. But I did come back, to cut a very long story short. And the land now has claimed me, and I realized that. And I walk the land now, and every step is so sacred to me. But I think I had to leave to hide and then to come back in. And I think now I've moved quite a lot from social justice and activism, which is what I used to do quite a lot with the Quakers and with the Climate Psychology Alliance and things like that, very much sort of at that question, how do we save the planet? What's our responsibility in this? What do we have to do? And I was working at that kind of level for a while, trying to gently meet people and say, perhaps it's a question where you have to ask the land first, and feeling that resistance, feeling that kind of, well, actually, no, we're in this paradigm where the solutions must be achievable. We must be able to fix things, and so you can tell me what to do to fix things, and through acquisition and technology and that kind of thing, the paradigm can be healed and fixed. There's a problem, we're panicking about it, and we're going to fix it. And I was sort of gently saying, well, actually, there's something that has to be embedded, rooted, grounded before we can get to that level. And so I think that's part of the reasons why I sort of retreated for a little bit, so that I could come back and feel that sort of rootedness was in myself as well. As Rueben said right at the beginning, to sort of heal my own trauma before I could be rooted enough to be able to step into saying the right things for people who needed to really feel it. So to cut a very long story short, my work really does focus, I think, now on bringing people to the land. And so imagine that spiral that Dana was mentioning. So in ecotherapy, when I teach ecotherapy, there's ecotherapy level 1. So us Druids, we like everything in 3. So imagine the entrance to really the very first touches of I belong to the planet and I, are rubbing along together, and I'm all of a sudden very conscious of this level, these levels of crises. But perhaps they don't know what an oak tree is. an ash tree. And so there's a level 1 that's really, really important, which is just go out. You know, I give you permission to go onto the land, to understand the weather, to realize that some places are good sit spots, some places maybe not so good, to actually just appreciate the elements, appreciate the living biosphere in that kind of level 1 level. And working with people who are often coming at that point with full of anxiety, I want to fix something, I really want to fix the world, and to hold them with that. And then as they move into that, they move into the relationship. And that relationship is what I would call the sort of the second spiral, as you've gone round again. And that second spiral is where we realize that there's a dissolving between the natural and the inner, the I and the outer. And that becomes much more where the relationship and the emotions and the power of the myth and the depth of time going forward as well as backwards really, really means something. But in a way, that's a lot where sort of ecotherapy can pause, where we work with, and I do it too. Sometimes I just need to go for a walk. Sometimes I just need to go, just stand by a tree and root. So that's my own therapy for that first level. And then sometimes it's the sort of the deeper immersion, which might be sleeping overnight outside, or working therapeutically, ritually, making a mandala, working in a more relationship kind of way. But then there's this sort of third, but you have to go through the 1, 2 to get to the third, which is this almost like a dissolving, where I think, Chief Rueben mentioned in ceremony that women, that dissolving when we're giving birth, when we are absolutely beyond that place where we think there's a transactional relationship going on between me as a human being and my outside space. That is also ecotherapy, but it is the dissolving. And I think I've come to the point now where that I would be absolutely honest and say that's my focus of everything that I do. I run courses, as you said, for the Tariki Trust in ecotherapy training. I'm doing a PhD in archaeotherapy because my first degrees were in archaeology. Well, my first degree was archaeology. My second degree was green economy. So I was trying to be all economic about it all and thinking about how to fix things in that kind of, capitalist, neo-capitalist paradigm. But realizing then very quickly that actually the answer is in the fact that we're screwing up the land, and our ancestors were holding these power points, these desperately incredible, pure, sacred spaces. And so I've come, full circle to realize that it's actually through connecting people to those sacred places that really matters. And I'm not sure how much time, I know I've got very little time. So I just wanted to share a photo or two of a place can you see that? No, that's not the right one. Let me just try again. You should be able to see that. Oh, I tell you why, because I've got it on my screen here. Can you see? Oh, sorry, I'm confusing myself because did you see the PowerPoint there?
We're seeing a little strip at the top with the white and red on top of that.
Ah.
The first time round we saw a PowerPoint. Now we've just got a bit of Microsoft.
Right.
Now
You guys still have so.
Well, I tell you what, it's just photographs, but it would just help you frame what my work really is doing in terms of speaking for the land, and my work merges where humans and land become one, where we've got rid of this unhelpful dichotomy where humans and nature don't exist, and that sort of animist relational interaction has disappeared. When I work with at-risk heritage sites, ancient or not so ancient, and I work with people, and I help them through a process called attending to place, where they go to a place, and then they go through a process of interacting, falling into relationship with this place. Some extraordinary things can occur for the human participant as well as that land. And just again, please tell me how much time I've got, but essentially that person
4 or 5 minutes, just real quick. So you're good. You're good.
Okay, so essentially that land becomes really present for that person, and so the person and the land, I just step out of the way at that point, and the person and the land have a direct animist relationship, a therapeutic relationship, or a relationship where the wounded land, that human-made changed landscape, speaks to the participant, and then the participant in turn senses like a responsibility, senses like feeling empathic moments. Oh, I saw somebody just throw something out the window at that place, and it really made me feel like this, and I want to protect. So there's protection and energy coming in as well. And it's just an extraordinary process. So yeah, and then just finally, that's the work that I do on the land, and that's the work that I do with ecotherapy. But with OBOD, yeah, I'm mentoring with OBOD, but I'm hosting a deep listening circle for people, and it was called initially, it was called the climate deep listening circle, but we've opened it up just a little bit and broadened it to the building resilience in difficult times deep listening circle. And that's really because people were coming with these very visceral, direct experiences of activism, of their local environment being damaged in some way, and feeling very much David and Goliath energy coming, where they had nothing, you know, very, very difficult experiences with you know, corporations. And then we realized that people are actually needing a sense of resourcing for themselves, you know, for emotional and community support, so that they can then go and do what it is that's in their heart, in their spirit, in their direct sacred action to do. So we've found that we don't really talk as much about the problems on the land, the sacred activism itself, but we really hold the individuals in a way that helps them feel that they're just listened to, that they're actually understood, and that people have like but not the same experiences themselves. And what, obviously, because we are just a global community that doing this now, we're hearing about people as they feel the world, in the complexities that they experience it in all sorts of places, and it has become a really beautiful community. So yeah, I think I'll kind of stop there.
Harriet,
Really.
Thank you. That was really wonderful to hear. Wonderful to hear. If we could, if participants could start putting questions into the chat, that'd be great. And hopefully we'll get a question or two for you. You said right at the start, who speaks for the land? And that kind of resonated massively with me. In one of my other roles, I'm a councillor, local politician, and I tried to get the rights of nature enshrined into the council's constitution. I failed. I'm going to try again. I will get there. But you know, we wanted to try and get this voice of nature within decision making. How else might we, you know, who speaks for the land? How else might we speak for the land, I suppose, is my question to you.
Well, it depends where you are, I think, in the world. And speaking for the land can be in the way that you yourself relate to the land. So it's not exploitative, it's not transactional. So you can start with your very own listening to the land, and by that you can go and have a place that before you even enter it, you ask a simple question: is it okay if I come and spend some time with you? you know, and really hear, feel, sense, whatever it is. I mean, we're getting into sort of like practices of how to actually feel, hear, you know, an animist being, or, you know, a space speaking. But there's that sort of thing of being ready to ask permission. I think if you aren't so used to listening to the land, it is easy to sort of think that we know best. And I don't mean that on the individual level per se. I mean, collectively, culturally, we say, this has to be done, this has to be done, and we know best. So you have to, I think it's just about checking in and just saying, is that right? Is that just a piece of received information? But what does the land say? And then if you do feel or dream, or, you know, synchronicities come in, or you learn bird language or anything like that, that tells you something that's not what the council tells you that the land wants to be developed, or, you know, something like that, really hear it. And I think people like you, Stuart, who are councillors, are the people to find, you know, so that we all actually feel like we've got a bit of a, you know, officialdom on our side as well, because I think that is a really helpful avenue. I think just finally, it's about just, yeah, listen, being prepared to listen, and being prepared to have a no if the land is wounded. I do a lot of work with a charity called Radical Joy for Hard Times, by the way, and we work deliberately with wounded landscapes, which are, you know, fracking pads, coal mines, places of atrocities, polluted rivers and things. And so you actually find that even after 20 years of, you know, the landscape being rewilded, that they're actually grounded on very, very toxic land that has not had a healing of any sort, let alone ritual healing. It's actually still toxic land. And so you will actually perhaps find that communication is complex. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff.
Thank you. Thank you. We've got a couple of questions asking for sort of contact details and your websites and so forth. So if we could pop those into the chat, that'd be great.
I will, yeah.
I
Marie,
can pop those in for you, Harriet.
Thank
fantastic.
you.
Thanks, Cynthia. Marie, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I do. You know, and I'll bring Patricia in after this sometime. But what you're talking about is probably one of the most important subjects, because this is what I'm finding, is that it's the disconnect of being in relationship to the land that is getting us to abuse it, because we're not seeing a relationship with it. We don't feel in communication. We don't feel. So instead we get this usury kind of relationship where it's something for us to use as an object or something. And as you bring people out there to the land to have that connection, then it really generates their sense of being in tune, you're not going to abuse your mother if you feel that they're your mother. But if you're thinking of it as an object, you might tend to think, well, I can do whatever I want with it. And so to me, what you're saying, and what Patricia might be talking about later in the Indigenous perspective, is to know that these words, when we say, oh, we are one and all this kind of thing, is to instead feel it and to bring that into your being state. And so I wanted to see if you wanted to say anything about that.
And yeah, thank you for just reflecting that back. It's about like when we say walking the walk, you know, it's so evocative of people who would say phrases that just haven't percolated down into the soul, into the cells, into the moment where you're actually walking the land and realizing that you're breathing in land and the land is breathing in you and holding you, and that you're both experiencing gravity. I mean, just there's such a collaborative, communicative aspect to everything. And yeah, but I think this is where the ecotherapy spirals or druidic esoteric spirals become so critical, and that we have to be kind to ourselves, because sometimes just that moment where we realize that we've dissolved, for want of a better word, into something that's not non-transactional, that's just really belonging, can be so enormous, you know, that it's easy to shut the doors again, especially when we have to be very compassionate with people about whose work might be quite, you know, disruptive. It might be that they work, you know, I shouldn't say, but you know, I know someone who's a geologist who is absolutely, he loved the earth. That was why he wanted to do geology, and he got snapped up by a water bottling company, you know, and it's those sort of sorrows really that it's that sort of, we get skewed into a direction that is much more transactional and exploitative. And it's about being very gentle with people, and recognizing that their will may be there, but the means to get to feel that takes tender care, I think. Yeah, I'm just looking.
Thank you.
I have literally a very small PowerPoints, but I will send them to you to send to people if in the future, if anybody's interested. Okay.
Fantastic. That's superb. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And another point you made too about, now that's why I'm going to bring Patricia in at this after this sometime. And what I would like Patricia to actually address is that if you come from a colonialist mindset, or you come from a place of fixing something, and this is what you were talking about, really, come from a place of fixing something, but you're in a mindset that doesn't understand that relational mindset or heart set, then what you're doing a lot of times is putting a bandage on a wound, or not. And this has to do with permaculture too. You're not understanding how nature works, how natural rhythm works, and what your natural rhythm is, and how you would function in that natural rhythm. And if you don't have that, if you're just functioning, trying to fix something from a point of view where you're just in your mind, or you're not feeling deeply into that new rhythm, the rhythm of your true nature, then you can't come from a place that really addresses where your sacred dream is. And so that's what I'm really hearing what you say. And I know that that's a favorite topic of mine and Patricia's. And does anybody want to ask any more questions in the chat, you know, on this amazing subject before we go to Patricia?
So thank you for having me anyway. It's great to be here and chat with you.
Oh, thank you so much, Harriet.
Thank you.
How about if we bring grandmother Patricia in, and
Yeah, let's do that.
And Patricia, if you could sort of start to, you're not going to maybe have as much time as some of the others because we're bringing you on as an extra added bonus, but I love you so much. Everybody in here is rocking it. All right.
Thank you, Mari and Stuart. You mentioned that time is short to make corrections to climate change and to global warming, and asked the questions how to help people come to learn to connect with spirit, and how do we accept it. And so I would like to spontaneously speak to that. So first of all, after 76 years of practicing not getting old, I lost a tooth last week. It couldn't be saved. And I'm going through an identity crisis now. So I want to mention that most of all, greetings to everyone and your participation. This is that we're in a world global crisis. So everyone, and also that is my spiritual family and relatives. AODA, born of the Mississippi Band of Choctaw, or the Tachiti and the Kiaani of the Dene, which commonly known as the Navajo people. And I'm an international educator, a traditional healer. I'm a diagnostician and practitioner, and the gift that I was born with, we call it Kienle. It's from Denepazad, and that's our sacred language and our sacred words of the holy people. And inclusively, all of our primordial ancestors are the holy people. I was initiated by my late father when I was 8 years old. And his name was Anselm George Davis of Archdruid, Arizona. Now, this was a time when our language and our culture and our ceremonies were illegal. And not only were they illegal, we had to hide, even particularly, especially on our own reservation, the Navajo Nation, the Netka and the Nepikea. These are referring to the sacred land in which we, Hajine is a place of our emergence onto the landscape. And so I would like to speak to the art of making distinction between the non-set the yin. Non-set the yin is the holy plant people. And so when we say the yin nahaga, we're talking about the plant, the holy plant people that provide a medicine for a healthy way of life, and it connotates plenitude, especially wealth. Our health is our wealth concept. And then the term drugs in the Western society is a chemically based that does not really contribute to our healing. It's more of a coping, just making that distinction here. And then, oh, by the way, Mari, oak itself, oak, I'm going to say, it's a little hard to say, chechilka. So oak is used in all of our ceremonies. And however, our tree, our quote, tree of life is corn. And then I want to just say that there are 3 belief systems which are Abrahamic. They are religion, Islam, and Judaism. And so then there are interspiritual, and then there's people in the interspiritual, and then there are secular humanitarians. And so then when we are talking about nature spirituality, Dana speaking about nature spirituality, all of these years I've been trying to think and understand what is the English term or word that is appropriate for my domain. The domain is really in the laws of nature, which is not any of these categories. However, it is an overarching domain. And so perhaps Hojo, natural order, law, spirituality, perhaps that's what it is. That's a long term. Natural order law governs all of us equally. It's cross-cultural, it's intergenerational, it is also, it's inclusive. There's no competing collectivities representing competing ideologies in our word Hojo, of the all-encompassing concept of holiness with H and wholeness with W, in this oneness of the natural order laws that govern us. And then it can be translated into any English. So you all might help me come up with what I just say to people in English, that I'm a systems level person, systems level change. And that reframe from the usury relationship that Ari was speaking about to becoming the steward. Well, it's already in the context container of the Nefazad, which is the language itself is that we exist, all of us equally. Everyone exists in this natural order because our body is the earth. We are 70, let's see, earth is 12%. Water is 72%, fire 4%, and air is 6%. And then this web of life and the interconnected etheric network, we might say we're calling that Ina. Sanskrit calls it Akad. What holds us together in this interrelationship and interconnectedness. And so specifically to just simplify the internalize, to remember and reawaken and internalize our very breath, the in-breath and out-breath is reminding and actualizing that we cannot exist outside of or separate from nature. Therefore, those who believe they do are the ones destroying themselves and everyone else. And so this teaching here that when we say Indigenous people, we're really talking about intention. There's only two intentions. There's only two. That is, I win and you lose, and winner take all, and I'll justify that I need to take it from you, and only me and my people can benefit by it. That is a win-lose. Nobody wins, and it's death-producing decision for those outcomes that we're witnessing today. So in that sense, with this war on our Mother Earth, Nahasan Hima, that is talking about the living spirit of an actual mother, the earth element itself, that's our body. And then Twa Azeh, which is the water, is sacred medicine, and so on. And Inapako Hajineko, the origin and the fire of life in our temperature. And this Chehdihin is the sacred air of peace and love of Creator. So at a practical level, our medicine, my late father was very knowledgeable, recognized, respected person who took care of people his whole life. And I witnessed at least 3 generations my lifetime. So our authentic medicine people, my teachers were of my father's lineage and his grandfather's lineage, the Tachi. Actually it's Yei, Dene, Tachi, and then the Kia'ani. So they tell us, do not fire anything into the air on New Year's Eve, like guns and things like that. Do not, like 4th of July. Think about it. That's air, your very life. It's in breath, out breath. Putting 21 gun salute. Why isn't it we can't breathe? So that's the most practical thing I can say. And then 2 or 3 things. The ceremonial way of life is to name what is out of balance and then identify the root cause of what it's out of. And so when we do that, have to empty out, have to cleanse, purify, make the corrections and say, Creator, I forgot who I am. I made a mistake. Make room for me while I correct myself. These are how the language goes, so that there's no blame. There's no healing and blaming, and healing is for everyone. So then we have group consensus, and everybody does their part from their ingenious, from their spark of divinity, from their inherent sovereignty with Creator within creation simultaneously, and their inherent gift serve in the world by making the decision for the greatest good for the greatest number of people. That's simply Hojo. And then if we do not choose that, we're calling that Hot, that word here even destructive and death producing. And we have to discern. And when we do a self-assessment, self-evaluation, discern. Life is simple, yes and no. And guess what, people? It's all existing within us. It's built within us. This decision-making process, whole brain thinking, conscience, and moral reasoning is Etholzen. Though in Sahakes, actually the word alila and Sahakes, that is like in my holy thinking, in my clear and congruent thinking, and the miracle power that goes with it. So I hope that short and fits into the template of the topic for today. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. I wanted to elaborate on that just a little bit because Patricia was saying that we ourselves are earth, water, fire, and air. We have fire inside of us as to digest our food. We have water inside of us. We have so as we start understanding, we have the in-breath. We are the element of air. We're not disconnected from this. So as we get in tune with this very nature that we are, like Patricia is talking about, then we start understanding that we are responsible for the nature of ourselves and all of the planet because it is part of us. The planet affects our body. You know, we pollute the planet, we pollute our body, we eat toxic food, so all these things cannot be divided among themselves. That we cannot compartmentalize thinking that we are a separate being. And in that, it brings about the understanding and the feeling of the what would you say, the cycle within that is actually present in our being. And so that's what Patricia, my synopsis is of what Patricia was actually sharing. And in that, as Patricia was talking about it, we can then make proper decisions based on the fact that we understand this relationship. And what does it say? We can then evaluate with a simple yes or no, all those decisions on whether they are actually good for ourselves. And we're going to bring Steve Breedlove in really soon, and he speaks on permaculture. And that is really the basis for permaculture, is to observe what the actuality of the living organism is and how it best takes care of itself, how it best stays in harmony with itself. And so when you're observing that land, and you can see like water runs downhill, that's a natural thing. So if you work with that idea that water runs downhill, then you don't try to necessarily pump it up. You let it do its natural thing and ascribe the things that you work with as solutions to work with the natural ways that water, as an example, works. So yeah, Patricia.
Just one more thing I wanted to mention. I was hoping that Rueben would stay and listen to what I had to say too, because I also went to Indian boarding school at 12 years old, and that's where I was told that all of our language and culture and our ceremony were witchcraft, and that we were all going to hell. So that's how much damage that has been done to so many generations in the 4 phases of conquest. And I won't go into those 4 phases, but boarding school and relocation is the 3rd phase, and that is where there is loss, self-negation, self-betrayal, self-effacement, all the way to suicide, self-destruction, and so on, because that's intergenerational, transgenerational, unresolved anger upon those in proximity. And so that loss then is the root cause of alcohol and drug anywhere and everywhere in the world. So out there, thank you. However, I was initiated into my father's traditional ceremonial ways, and I was extremely battered and discredited practically my whole life. Thank you for just spontaneously.
Sometimes we find that, yes, truth tellers, when they're misunderstood and they challenge the status quo, can be greeted with animosity. And the thing is, how do we start softening those bonds that the other people are finding threat in? And these are big questions that we can ask ourselves. And how can we be a big enough love to incorporate that in? And nonviolent communication really is something that's very helpful in that, besides all the spiritual work we're doing. There was something I was going to say, but I've forgotten. So I will, I think that the whole.
Mari, do you want to open up the chat for just a moment?
Yeah, absolutely. Does
The
anyone
chat is open.
So if anyone has any questions for Grandmother Patricia, now's the time to put them into the chat.
Yep. Absolutely. What's really lovely about us all speaking together today is just really hearing each other and sharing so many deep things and bouncing off each other and then letting it deepen our own practice. And I think as we create more forums for that to really start taking hold, that we'll really start being able to find the line to pursue the way, you know, just in this beauty of inquiry and like Harriet said, the beauty of inquiring in the land, because that requires not being self-satisfied, but also thinking, you know, that doesn't allow you to grow. It doesn't allow you to get to the next level of being. It's being a person that kind of is willing to sidestep their knowing and just open up to the bigger picture and source, you know, kind of brings the question, okay, where am I to go next? So is anyone saying anything that they want?
Just a reminder that I'm describing and illustrating and defining from this ceremonial language. It's not from conversational language. It's tribal language. It's not from the Navajo language. It's from the Nehbazad, the ceremonial esoteric language. And so English is a money and finance and a commerce language, and it's abstract. And so that's just making a distinction of then why we're pitted against one another, because it's a dualistic language, and the how-to is to navigate that double bind, the mutually exclusive message, mutually incongruent message, to bring people to a group consensus to design the co-creative solutions with creator, within creation, with each other, that power within to have power with each other, to eliminate the power over conquest, brute force, and deception of these pipelines that are still wanting to run over all of us.
Yeah, you were saying also with language, the indigenous people, most of their languages didn't originally hold ideas of self and other as being other than, what's the expression you say, Patricia? You know, in our language, there's everyone, all my relations. There is no self and other, therefore you become the enemy. We're all in this together. And that makes me actually cry. But in that understanding, we have a life view of that. And when you hold that as a life view, you don't look at your brother or sister in the same way as something to be gotten, something from, take from. Instead, you say, how do we do this together? How do we create this sacred energy together? And somebody's asking, would Grandmother Patricia be willing to speak a little on the delicate issue of partnering with Indigenous people and not having difficulties with appropriation? Yeah, there's so much pain that this can become an issue. And I think that if I'm just going to say something real quick before I give that to Patricia, is if we are humble enough to actually say, hey, I'm really uncomfortable with this subject and I really want to make something good. And I know that it might not be interpreted correctly, but my heart is in it so much. And this can happen with all races, you know. I really want to hear your opinion. I want to hear your come from. I want to learn about you. I want to experience you and not take it for granted. How many people in this room have very deep relationships with Black people, Hispanic people, to the point where they can share their soul? And so a lot of what I do with Ancestors of the Four Directions is part and parcel of that, as well as what we're doing here with Order of the Oak. But go ahead, Patricia.
Well, enemy creation means to project the war within, where there's no correction of peacemaking with Creator, within creation, and then with each other. That's what it takes. So that enemy creation is I have to devalue someone and dehumanize someone, and then to make those decisions in which I'm going to benefit, but not you. So how to first of all, you have to establish rapport before you can have trust. And thus far, there was a European and Navajo person by Mark Charles who said, we're using the word reconciliation, that we don't have a common memory, so we can't reconciliate. So that means that when we befriend someone, then we're not when they say without appropriating, well, in the first place, your intention is I win and you win, and that's constructive and life affirming. So that's my intention. Thinking, my speaking, my action, my decision making going to be congruent. And with that spirit within of number one, the earth, the holy earth surface people, although the Bela Ashlai, which is the holy five-finger people. Now, when I said that in English, nobody was left out. So consider yourself that we're in English, humane is humane with an E, humane beings. So as a humane being, our whole repertoire is going to be congruent with, I'm not here to take advantage of you or exploit you. You don't even have to say that. You're already with that intention. And so it's going to take focus on your own intention, and you're going to find that racism, whereas I have to control the world and manipulate the world resources because of my fear. Just understand that fear is a call for love, and peace is a call for guilt, and scarcity is a call for abundance. So our intention, then we put that into action and we make decision yes or no. And I hope that's practical because I'm giving you the mechanics. Practical for your application and your personal life and your community life, your professional life. And that is let's put our intention to our global governments as well. Not governments, global governing systems to correct themselves accordingly the way that we're intending today.
Wonderful. Somebody asked about the language you were speaking in, Danette Azad. And we'll be bringing Patricia on for other summits so she can go more deeply into different topics. But thank you, Patricia. And I don't see any other questions particularly immediately. So I'd like to hand off to Stuart and Steve.
Excellent. Thank you, Marie, and thank you, Patricia. Right, I'm going to introduce Steve Breedlove, who's a member of Starhawk's permaculture team. Apparently, Steve's a father, gardener, veteran, and community organizer. You've got half an acre in California's Central Valley, which designing resilience for a changing world. You do permaculture design, and you're a student in the Earth Activist Training Regenerative Land Management Program. So you are the perfect person to tell us how to save the planet.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me. I wouldn't go so far to say I'm the perfect person to explain that. I'm actually quite humbled and admittedly a bit intimidated being in this space with such wisdom and so many varied experiences that inform how we kind of approach this work and this question. If I may, I was going to share a slideshow and try and work through that over the next 6 or 8 minutes, if that's okay.
Go for it. You can share your screen.
Excellent. All right, I think Archdruid Driscoll mentioned that she kind of does permaculture and the spirit path together, and I'm kind of a permaculture and radical politics kind of person myself. I come out of the left political space, and most of my awakening about the world and the problems we face and potential solutions to those problems is informed by my politics. So let me put this on full screen. Okay. All right. Resistance is fertile, and I do believe that. First, I'm at Earth Activist Training is a 501c3 educational nonprofit founded in 2000 that attempts to link regenerative ecological design, education, and social justice activism. I am a student in their 2-year regenerative land management program, and I help co-teach the permaculture design certificate entry program. And I got my design certificate in 2017 and kind of came into this space in 2011, having attended a couple peak oil conferences. First, a land acknowledgement. I'm on the traditional lands of the Mechoopda Maidu in Northern California. That slide background is the Butte Creek Canyon. Butte Creek was super important to the Mechoopda and their lifeway. And it remains one of the only intact salmon runs on the west coast of the United States. They were a salmon and acorn people. And then I had a discussion, and I'm constantly dealing with this question about how to acknowledge land. And I had an interesting conversation with a Takelma organizer and land steward. And so I put this together that we are organisms, that we belong to a community of life. Our existence is a gift that only the land gives, and our spiritual task is to resist that which destroys and to repair what has been broken. And that's both materially in the physical environment, but also psychospiritually. What is permaculture? Permaculture came out of the kind of general Western environmental movement. We had Silent Spring and the Earthrise photo, the limits to growth, many of you are probably familiar with, in '72, and the oil embargo the following year. Bill Mollison and Holmgren, David Holmgren, were Australian or New Zealanders, and they kind of brought applied ecology into the environmental discussion. Permaculture is a syncretic discipline. So it kind of borrows from a bunch of different things, and it's none of those things at once, including applied ecology, regenerative agriculture, also draws heavily from peasant and folkways, recognizing that human beings that have existed in biomes or environments for many generations have a knowledge of that land base and a set of tools and skills to extract their sustenance from that landscape, or rather cultivate their sustenance in that landscape. And so we draw from those folkways. It also incorporates political economic theory, eco-social and feminist theory. And at once permaculture is relational and scientific. It's not entirely relational and it's not entirely scientific. It kind of straddles that lane. And here on the left is from Holmgren's book, Pathways Beyond Sustainability. And you can kind of see how all sorts of things that we talk about in the sustainability space are all kind of encompassed in permaculture. It's kind of like a, I kind of conceive of it as like an umbrella for all of these things within a coherent design methodology. Permaculture is a set of principles and ethics, as Archdruid Driscoll said. It's also an analytical design methodology. Sorry, I'm a bit nervous. It's also a set of tools and techniques, and it's a global community of practice. Earth care, people care, fair shares. I really like that Archdruid added spirit aware. I might have to pick up her book and kind of learn more about that, how to incorporate it into my teaching and my own practice. And around this circle are 12 principles derived from Holmgren that we use to analyze spaces and consider relationships between elements. And it informs our design process. There's a bunch of different methods that we use on this screen. Is just kind of a smash up. We use mapping, zone and sector analysis, Yeoman scale of permanence, among others, to kind of help us. In the top right is a needs and yields analysis. These are just tools we use to make good decisions and to make connections, recognizing that the earth is a living thing and it's a system, and everything is related to everything else. And so this just helps us make sense of how things are related so that we can facilitate connections. Tools and techniques, there's many of them. Swales are a common one a lot of people know. Contour planting, interplanting, guilds, polycultures, net and basin here in the middle for water catchment and storage, so that we can make our landscapes resilient to drought and reduce our dependence on groundwater pumping and taking from surface streams that serve important environmental functions for fisheries and wetlands. More tools and techniques, we use guilds. Food forest is just a patterned guild at scale. We also use passive design in our buildings, and lasagna garden is a classic one there on the bottom right. Permaculture is also a global community of practice, and I think this is where permaculture gets most of its strength. As I mentioned before, it draws from every tradition it can draw from, and recognizes that humans that occupy spaces and steward land are the ones who are best equipped to show us Westerners, folks from industrial developed states, how we should be structuring the systems that supply our well-being, our food system, our water, clean air, etc. And these folks know how to manage that land because they've done it for generations in place. Here on the screen, I have a MILPA system, which is Indigenous Mexicans, uses kind of cyclical pattern of land management. On the bottom left is a Dehesa. That is an old world Iberian system of agroforestry, where they grow oaks, olives, among other things. It's a dryland strategy, which I think could be replicated in California at scale, with huge ecological benefits, both to hydrology, to soil carbon stores, mitigating climate change, etc. Also, you have Indigenous Australians on the bottom left practicing cultural burning. Most peoples practice some form of cultural burning, just a kind of land management technique. And then you kind of have these polycultures in tropical agriculture here on the right. So why do we need this, and why do we need to do it at scale? Well, first of all, carbon sequestration. right? Climate change is a really big deal. I'm sure if most of you are like me, it gives you quite a bit of anxiety. And here's just a couple graphics that show what our actual biomass stocks, this is primarily in forest and grassland soils, and what the potential could be. Rather than spending money on hypersonic ballistic missiles and new airplanes and aircraft carriers and new bases in the Philippines to provoke China into a war, we could be using those financial resources for restoring soils, restoring forests, and allowing ourselves the ability to supply the calories we need as organisms, while also fostering beneficial relationships and preserving biodiversity. Here's a couple slides on land restoration and terraforming. Terraforming is something that you're like, oh, it's like sci-fi, right? But we can take, it's called afforestation, technically, but it's where you can build a forest where a forest has not existed for many, many generations, or over geologic time. For the last many thousands or tens of thousands of years, a forest hasn't existed, but we can modify the environment through earthworks, etc., to harvest more rainwater passively and actually grow forests where forests haven't grown for a very long time. This is an example of the Greening the Desert project in Jordan. This is at a homestead scale. You can see the before and after here. Here is the Loess Plateau, which was degraded land from earlier dynastic China. And this is a more modern approach of using applied ecology and scientific management to land at the landscape scale. And you can see on the, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor here, but on the left here, you can see the erosion gullies here, and you can see how the solution was to terrace. Obviously, terracing is widely used across East Asia, and then also in South America in some places. And then on this picture on the bottom right, you can see that again, this kind of terracing to prevent soil from going down the hill and to help store water further in the land or further up in the landscape, which helps charge the lowlands hydrology much better. The effects of this kind of restoration and management or terraforming has gigantic implications. And here's another one. It's one of my favorite. This is in Saudi Arabia. I believe it's on the Red Sea. It's called the AODA project. And the guy who did this project has a company that deals with this, and they're primarily specializing in saltwater aquaculture, so that coastal peoples can utilize their landscapes to produce calories and also have, like, you know, their economic well-being, have things to trade. And AODA is just amazing. They only irrigated this for 2 years. And then they had to take it off irrigation because they ran out of funding, and it worked because they set everything in place. And they kind of, it's basically taking the concept of ecological succession and giving it a push in a direction, and then allowing those systems to do what they do. Nature wants to create biomass. And so that's what it does if you give it the abiotic conditions to do so. And here's another example from the AODA project. You can see these degraded landscapes, desert, Saudi Arabia, and they're facilitating the growth of grasslands, which now provide fodder for their herd animals. Another reason we need to do this at scale globally, this land restoration project, permaculture, is for biodiversity preservation. Obviously, we all know that biodiversity has suffered greatly under industrial extraction across the globe. And so we need to make conscious efforts to give to those other things that we share this planet with. And there's a whole host of ways. I think, Stuart, you mentioned that you're in council where you're at in the local government. This could be planting highway strips, or, you know, other programs to facilitate public lands using native plants and other things that benefit the local insects. And the insects are obviously the primary consumers. And then there's all the birds and reptiles and amphibians that follow and eat those as food. And then you also have sustainable and development equity. A big part of Earth Activist Training's focus is on this social justice aspect and remedying the consequences of colonialism and industrial extraction in the global South. And on the bottom left, you have a constructed wetland. It's just a way to produce biomass with our waste rather than sending it off to a wastewater treatment plant. And then you have aquaculture at small scale, people growing fish. I think this is a tilapia pond in Malawi, I want to say. And then on the bottom right, we have Cuban urban farms. These are all ways to provide the calories people need and provide economic livelihoods in environmentally responsible ways. And then we also have personal resilience, right? Like the inflation, all of these things that people are like, oh my God, they don't realize that we're, you know, on borrowed time, that a economy based on non-renewable resources cannot exist forever. And so like permaculture also offers a lot of personal resilience. I know for me, I have, and not to brag, I empathize with folks who are in hard times, but I have a lot of cushion to these kinds of rapid changes happening in our political economy because I take responsibility for procuring at least some of my calories, medicines, and other things. So Earth Activist Training offers a bunch of classes in person. The address is at the top, earthactivisttraining.org. And highly recommend you just check out the website, see if you want to pursue this education or even enter conversation. We have a very supportive online community using a platform called Mighty Networks, which is it's kind of like a Facebook-esque thing, but it's a curated community. So it's pretty focused on dealing with these issues. And then just to reiterate, we're organisms and we belong to a community of life. Human existence is a gift that only the land gives. We have to resist that which destroys, but also repair what has been broken. And I believe that permaculture and regenerative land management and ecological restoration at scale is the only thing that really is going to fix a lot of these problems, climate change, economic insecurity, etc. So thank you very much for your time. And I hope that some of this was useful to you.
Steve, that was really impressive. Thank you. Could we open the chat up for people to put some questions in? That would be really
Chat
great.
is open.
Fantastic. If I may, if I could start with a question while people are typing, I suppose. You talked about eco-socialism. You talked about your cushion for rapid changes, and a lot of what we saw, a lot of those examples were big examples, except for the Cuban urban farm, I suppose. What advice have you got for people who don't have a lot of land? I live in the middle of a town. I have people around me, mostly in flats. What advice would you have for them, both to you know, give themselves that cushion, but also to engage with permaculture and to engage with the land?
Okay, yeah, I was going to include in that personal resilience a bit about scale and how, you know, some of our permaculture design certificate students actually produce patio garden designs because we recognize not everybody has space. I don't have a lot of space and I can use it quite effectively. And you could find tons of images of people on tiny little suburban postage stamps or in apartment complexes where they find a little unused corner, right, of the parking lot that gets enough sun, and then they can build the soil there and cultivate the soil biology and then grow a plant, even if it's just like an edible shrub, or maybe it's just a flowering shrub that attracts the kind of bird that they're really interested in looking at, right? Like, and I think it's really important that like one of the principles in that 12 principles of permaculture design is value the marginal. And I think for a lot of people in urban areas, you see like urban farming and kinds of other things, especially like earth repair, like kind of mitigating the toxins we've loaded the soil with over the last many decades. There's a lot of ways that we can find little unused spots to do this kind of work. And even if it's, you know, 1,000 square feet or 500 square feet, if you build good, healthy soil there, and I think Archdruid of Driscoll was mentioning milkweed seeds. If you even just guerrilla plant some wildflower seeds there, it will help something. And like all of the pressure these other species that we share the planet with all of our brother and sister species. All of them are under such intense pressure. If we can provide them refugia, I think she said, is a fantastic concept, because we really just need to give them the chance to do what they do. We need to give as much habitat as possible, and that will help them in their resilience to climatic change or other kinds of disturbances. Did that answer your question? I'm not sure. Oh, you're muted.
I'm muted, aren't I? Thank you, Steve. That was really helpful. 10 by 50 foot is a big garden in the UK, I can tell you.
I mean, even if you only have 10 feet, right? Like 10 square feet.
There's a question here from Lisa. I live in an area with bedrock very close to the surface. I'm unable to dig in most locations to create swales to control and reserve water. Would rock or even a laid log ridge laid to slow the runoff of rain, would that help with the groundwater in a similar way to swales?
I would in AODA, where there's very little soil, right? You're basically starting at primary succession in ecological terms. So you'd probably be better served, right? In the scale of permanence too, we talk about like how much energy does it take to push a system, and we always kind of look for the lowest energy, lowest labor ways to do things. So your solution on very shallow soils might just be taking some of the loose rocks on the surface and stacking them on contour, as you saw in that photo of AODA. And that all that does is help water during a heavy rain, helps water that would normally sheet off the land and carry what little soil had accumulated, and it'll stop that and slow it down. So it has a time to settle out those sediments and start to actually build thicker soil that first annual grasses and forbs will colonize. Colonize is a bad word. Will occupy. And then eventually, as your soils get thicker, you'll get the kind of shrubs that can exist in those soils and so on. And succession then moves forward as it does. I don't know if that answered the question.
Fantastic. Thank you. Question from Freda. As an elder who lives alone on the land and who has long grown almost all my food, I'd like to suggest there are many rural people who would love to offer the opportunity for townies to come and learn. Mm-hmm. How do we create those connections? Yeah.
How do you create those connections? It's like the perennial question, right? Like humans, I don't know, in my experience, I don't want to generalize, but like it's very difficult to get people to understand, and then communication is always an issue because we come from different backgrounds. But part of permaculture is these communicative practices. In fact, there's entire Starhawk leads one of the courses that's focused on social permaculture and various systems for not just structuring organizations, but also interpersonal communication.
Yeah.
I forget the name of that. I want to say it's just called social permaculture. If you go on the website, you'll see it though.
Sounds absolutely fascinating. Yes, building communities. If there are local Facebook networks near a small town, you can post and create awareness.
Yeah, there's all sorts of permaculture guilds. I was on the board of a nonprofit that managed the local guild for a number of years, and we did all sorts of outreach and education and actual work, because I think that's really the important part. It's like we're kind of, in my opinion, not in the opinion of Earth Activist Training necessarily, but in my opinion, like we're beyond the point where we need to be educating and still discussing these things. Like we need to act. We are out of time. Yeah.
Good, cool. Yeah. Marie, did you want to come in with any questions?
And there was also a question from a participant. Steve, if you could make your slides available.
Sure. Yeah, that's no problem.
Thank you.
I mean, it's not the greatest slideshow. I'm still an amateur when it comes to PowerPoint.
It was great.
There's a few comments I want to make because I see a lot of beauty in what you're talking about. One was just the fact of needing to educate still, yes, and move in, but even people don't know that they should leave the tree leaves and put them into the earth itself rather than rake them up, as an example. That the trees are dying because they're not being refortified with what they naturally put down into the earth. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of a parable for that, you know, to make something pristine and looking good, maybe, you know, wearing formaldehyde on your face as an example isn't really, you know, your natural propensity, and it doesn't nourish you. Maybe your natural ways are nourishing you, like the tree is nourishing itself, you know. And one comment about that also was that a lot of people are or have over the past only nurtured particular grains or foods or different things, and they've chosen things to sell, and then they don't allow the nature to have all of its diversity, and that the lack of diversity is leading to crises in itself, because some of those are not drought tolerant and all sorts of things, because we have become addicted to some idea that we just want certain kinds of things. And so if we don't have big predators, as an example, there are going to be too many deers, and then the deers are going to eat all the trees. And then, so we end up with a problem from thinking that we can pick and choose what nature is giving us. And in that, as an example, beavers, which seems to be my favorite topic immediately, when you reintroduce beavers to streams, then things start greening all around, because they build certain kinds of structures that allow water to actually flow and not having droughts, and they'll build structures, and then it'll get greener and greener and greener and greener, and suddenly the everything has transformed. So when you put back what is natural, what is real, what is supposed to be there, and not have your agenda just to get, you know, make as much money as possible and protect every sheep, you're putting back the wolves, you're putting back different things, then you start seeing that this all works together and you will be taken care of too. So I don't know if you want to comment about any of this, but.
Yeah, there's a major component of permaculture that's just about rewilding. A lot of it is based around like human impact, because your food comes from somewhere, right? And like we can either get our food from in a way that like facilitates ecosystem function, or we can go buy it from an industrial monocrop, right? But yes, someone mentioned earlier about the permaculture zones. If y'all are not familiar with it, it's just another way of looking at scale and energy inputs, etc. And so you would, in a perfect world, in my ecotopia, right? Like we would have large sections which are entirely left alone once we've done the repair work for that ecosystem to function under its, you know, conditions. Obviously, ecosystems change, the planet changes, right? Earth is moving all the time. But to put it back in a way where it was pre-colonization or pre-industrial extraction, and then allow large swaths of land to just be, and we might still go hunt the elk or hunt the antelope and participate in that system, but it's going to be much more hands-off. Whereas closer to where you live and your human habitat, you'll have much more intensive systems that require more work, like more of your human labor, and are much denser in their design versus the kind of broad acre stuff. That's why I like the Dehesa system so much. Like I tried to buy land here locally, 100 acres, and I got outbid. It's okay. But just to have like an oak woodland and you manage the grass underneath using animals and stuff. Well, guess what? Like the deer will find that place a nice place to get a meal, right? Like if you restore the grassland, even if you're using that grassland for your domesticated livestock, like other animals can still use it, right? Versus our system now, which is you leave the cattle on a piece of land until it looks like a moonscape, right? And then it's not useful for anything. But if you're using rotational grazing and other management techniques, then you'll find that you're increasing the overall primary production of the ecosystem, and that provides enough for you and for everything else. And then again, there is that kind of self-regulation mechanism in the third ethic of fair shares, right? You might recognize like, hey, I really think I could probably squeeze another few pounds out of my cattle if I graze them on there, but I saw some does with fawns up, they bred or gave birth in the woodlot up above, and they're feeding, they're just coming out and eating for the first time. I'm going to leave the cattle off that so they have enough to get their strength as young deer and be able to utilize that landscape as well for their own.
Yes, thinking more holistically and how we can do everything. It's phenomenal. Is there another question that came up? I think
no,
also,
I don't think so. There's a nice comment about beavers, and certainly in the UK, I think the people who look after the rivers are starting to realise the power of the beaver in protecting and reducing flooding, which certainly we suffer with dreadfully here, by holding back the water, not letting it just rush through.
Yeah, and on that real quick, the political side of it is that if we manage landscapes in a way that bolsters ecological function, it's actually less expensive. So when it comes to like, oh, how do we fund this? It's cheaper to have a functional hydrology that puts water into the ground and into the groundwater table than it is to, have concrete culverts everywhere to manage stormwater, right? Like it would use less energy and less financial resources, which money as a representation of energy, right? It would use less of that if we just made more intelligent design decisions in our human habitats.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a final comment about wolves. I must say I'm very jealous that you've probably got wolves in your country. The only wolves we've got are in zoos here, which is very sad. But
they are nowhere near where I'm at. We have coyotes are probably our and mountain cats are our primary predator, top tier predators.
Fantastic.
And humans, of course. Humans are voracious. Unfortunately.
Comment about the fact this monocropping thing, and basically looking to other people to create and grow our food kind of puts you into a subconscious fear zone, because then that if the blank hits the fan, excuse my language, that you don't really have the ability to know how to do anything. And I can't even begin to think that our subconscious is not fearful on some level, that we are so dependent on things coming from far away. And instead, if we started to cultivate even our own gardens instead of lawns, lawns have their place, but our own gardens, our own, giving ourselves something subconsciously that feels like we're taken care of, or that we can be okay, that we start addressing and a need to be able to really relax a little bit more. And I think that sometimes maybe to think of even getting land together as groups, and start thinking, how can we do this together if we can't afford all this? What kinds of projects can we do? And talking to each other and forming those alliances.
Yeah, definitely. Cooperative financing also fits within the umbrella of permaculture, and it's a big thing. And if you happen to have land, or your parents die and leave you land, and you find you can't get other people, or consider contacting the local indigenous folks and consider gifting it back so they can manage it and use it for their their medicines, etc., so forth. Yeah.
I think along that line, when you do go back to the land, you get an empowerment of knowing how to start making your medicines, how to start how to even make baskets or anything. Not that we have to go all the way back or not, but there must be a feeling of empowerment that comes with being able to take care of business no matter what happens.
Yeah, the resiliency aspect is really what drew me to it, because like I said at the beginning, I came into this in about 2011, read a bunch of stuff. Obviously, the financial crisis shaped my life because I graduated with an undergraduate degree like 3 months before Lehman Brothers collapsed, right? Like, and so I was looking at zero prospects, right? And so that's how I wound up in the military as a poverty draftee, and something to do to pay the bills, right? And then I went to some peak oil conferences and started reading a bunch. And then I was like, oh my God, like I got to do something, because like this is not going to provide everything. I need to be more connected to it and take more responsibility too, right? Like that's a big part of it. And so that's how I wound up here. Yeah.
Wow, brilliant. There's a comment there from Lisa around that most people don't care or even think about where the food comes from. I was talking to starting a podcast, and we interviewed a person who set up a charity working with traumatized children on farms. On their farm they've developed, and these kids didn't believe that the potatoes they were digging up actually grew in the soil. They were convinced that the people had planted whole potatoes, bought them from the supermarket and planted them beforehand, just to try and prove a point. You know, it's really quite scary, that complete lack of connection and understanding.
Yeah, but I think what's happening now with the inflation, especially, but also geopolitical instability, the energy crisis in Europe, which, you know, I'm probably preaching to the choir, because I'm somewhat detached from it. But like these kinds of systemic rumblings, I guess you could say, I think more people are open to it. And so then it comes to communication, that cross-cultural communication, even if it's just political ideological differences, is like, how do you communicate? Okay, you can leave out we're doing this because it's important to restore the earth and provide for other creatures, or you can say, hey, we can do this and it doesn't matter what happens outside, you'll have some kind of security by provisioning your own needs. I can help you design an efficient system for your suburban backyard that will help kind of provide a cushion to these things that we really have no control over. And it's just then how you frame it, right? Like I know in my mind, by virtue of them growing more food, they're cutting their food miles, right? And they're reducing fossil fuel consumption in aggregate, right? Or they're providing now plants for insects that eat pollen and other creatures, right? Like I know in my mind, it's good for the planet that they do this, but they just need to think about their home economics. And so it's a difficult thing. I'm not pretending I'm an expert by any means, but yeah, it's difficult to communicate, but I do think that there is a willingness and an opportunity to reach folks who would normally not care where their food comes from, but now when they do go to the store and they're like, $10 for a dozen eggs, like my God, and you're like, oh, you have 4,000 square foot suburban lot, do you know you can get some chickens? Right? Like, so it's just kind of how you approach it, I guess.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, that's like what we were talking about before with Dana, is really taking someone where they're at and addressing their needs and what they need, and at the same time opening their heart and mind through that, because then they'll start having these personal ahas about, wait a minute, oh, and this is good for the planet too, and this, oh, maybe, you know, so it takes them on a journey from where they're at and being able to address where they're at to opening their heart. That's so beautiful what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I try and communicate too. I'm like, I make spaces in my yard for lizards, primarily two species of lizard, an alligator lizard and a blue belly lizard. And they're the dominant species that I have here. Anyway, like the cockroaches, like a lot of people spray for cockroaches, but guess what? If you build habitat for birds and reptiles, like the cockroaches are there if you pick up a rotten log or whatever, but like they're not causing problems. You don't, you know, they don't come into the house. You don't have to worry about that if you're afraid of a cockroach, because you're creating an ecosystem that manages the pest, right? And so that's a big part of permaculture, but also organic agriculture, regenerative agriculture, is making these connections in the agro ecosystem so that you don't have to use poisons, right? Because then that has a knock-on effect on things you don't want to poison, but you're ultimately poisoning them because it's a cost benefit, especially in a super competitive agricultural system. It's beyond the scope of this conversation, but our ag policy is just messed up, at least in the United States. I can't speak for other countries, but our ag policy is so messed up that we subsidize things that don't need to be subsidized, and we don't provide much financial assistance to the things that really matter, like the high density, intense vegetable farming, etc.
Yeah, I think it's pretty bad here as well.
I'm sure it is. It's industrial, it's capitalism, right? It's a system that's efficiency is another word for using more inputs. In my opinion, that's how I conceive of it.
And what you're saying also, oops, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think we probably ought to wrap it up now.
Yeah.
I'm just conscious of time.
Yeah,
I'm just going to say one more thing real quick. Is to me, what you're saying also is that nature has a way of balancing itself. It has its own inherent wisdom, and so we don't have to get rid of the cockroaches or things like that, because there is if you understand how to reenact that balance within, then everything will be in balance. And that's very indigenous also, you know, very much in alignment with Druidism and indigenous philosophy and understandings. That is a real world concept, you know. So
absolutely. I just want to thank you for inviting us and giving me the time to speak with you. I very much enjoyed it. Thank you.
Really good. Thank you so much for joining us. Marie, on that note, let's wrap up. I would want to just say a massive thank you to a few people before we close the space, particularly Ingrid, Cynthia, and Karen as looking after the techie side. Well done. No chance we could have done it without you. As our 5 speakers, Dana, Chief Rueben, Harriet, Patricia, and Steve, fantastic. I think I've learned huge amounts, and obviously you two as co-host, Marie, that was fantastic, and obviously everybody who's joined us this evening. You know, wonderful to see so many people here and superb questions. Marie, shall I? Do you want to say anything before we go, and then before I close the space?
Yeah, I was going to say this afterwards, but why don't I say it now? I mean, besides the thank you that we'll get to later, the Order of the Oak plans to continue to build on the work that we've started here by holding future summits that address healing our planet and ourselves, and the decisions we need to make or have the opportunity to make, really, and actions that we can do to have that happen. And by dissecting and addressing problems and possibilities, we can identify real world solutions. And remember to join our YouTube channel and stay in touch with us, because we'd like to start a forum where we really start helping each other. You know, Indigenous people, Druidic people, all pagan people, all people, where we can really start addressing all this and bring ourselves into proper harmony and proper relationship and back into balance. So please join us in this pursuit as we save the planet and life itself. It is all up to all of us. And I will go into the rest of it after we have concluded with ceremony.
Brilliant. Thank you, Marie. Okay, let's just close this space then. So spirits of the east, of air, of the hawk of dawn and of spring, we thank you for your guidance. Hail and farewell. Spirits of the west, of water, of the salmon in the gentle stream and of autumn, we thank you for your guidance. Hail and farewell. Spirits of the north, of earth, of the bear and of winter, we thank you for your guidance. Hail and farewell. Spirits of the south, of fire, of the stag and of summer. We thank you for your guidance, hail and farewell. Spirits of our places, of our ancestors and those yet to be born. Great spirits, universe, one voice, and all that is. And of course, the spirit of the oak. We thank you all for your guidance. Hail and farewell. I now declare this conference closed. Thank you, everybody.